My parents ditched my event for my brother's football game, only to find out later it was my wedding. After the pictures blew up online, dad threatened divorce, mom's in meltdown mode, brothers raging, now the entire family's falling apart piece by piece. Hey Reddit, so I invited my parents to something important. They chose my brother's football game instead. I didn't tell them it was my wedding. Photos went online. Now my family's in chaos. Here's how it went down. I'm Sam, 28 male, married now, good job, decent life. But if you asked my mom, she's only got one kid worth talking about, and it's not me. My younger brother Mike, 22 male, was born, and apparently became the son our whole house had to orbit. Mom, 52 now, turned into one of those parents who thinks their kids' football stats are the center of the universe. She wasn't like that before. I remember her being normal when I was little. School projects on the fridge, showing up at my science fair, stuff like that. Then Mike came along, and it was like I got erased from the family picture. Doesn't matter that I put myself through college, never asked them for a dime, and actually have a career now. When it comes to my mom, the only stories worth repeating start and end with Mike and whatever game he played last weekend. Dad, 53, never yelled at me or anything, but he never stood up to her either. He just sat there in the background while mom hyped Mike up like he was a future NFL star. Grandpa Joe, dad's dad, was the only one who'd point out how messed up it was. He lives a few states over, about a 3-hour drive from my parents' place, but called every week, and he never hid the fact that he thought mom was playing favorites. He said it straight to her face once during Christmas. Mom didn't talk to him for months after that. One thing that still stings. My grandparents set up a college fund for me. After a small house fire my junior year, mom started calling it an emergency fund and said it got used for repairs. Years later, I learned the truth. A big chunk went to Mike's first car, and another chunk went to the down payment on his apartment when he started college. I was working 2 jobs just to keep my own rent paid back then. People ask why I didn't go no contact sooner. Truth is, I tried for years to win some kind of approval. I kept thinking if I hit enough milestones, they'd show up. Didn't happen. Grandpa Joe was the only one who acted proud of me. When I graduated college, he mailed me a handwritten letter saying he wished he could have been there and slipped a $100 bill inside because every man deserves a cold drink after walking the stage. That's the kind of guy he is. I met my wife, Nora, in college. We started as friends, both working at the same library desk job. She knew about the family stuff early because she saw it firsthand. Freshman year, my parents visited campus once the whole year because Mike's team had an away game nearby. They didn't even call me to meet up. I found out through Facebook pictures. Nora's the opposite of my family. Her parents show up to everything. Small stuff too. Like when she had a photography exhibit, her mom brought cookies for the whole class. Watching that was weird for me at first. Anyway, the story really starts last year, after one dumb thing Mike did online. But to explain why it hit so hard, you gotta understand the pattern. Mike's been good at football since middle school. I won't lie. He's talented. Got a scholarship to a decent college. But the way my parents acted, you'd think he was already in the Hall of Fame. Mom has a whole room at home full of his jerseys, medals, framed action shots. Meanwhile, I put myself through school with no help, got into tech, moved up slowly. When I bought my first car with my own money, Mom said, "Oh, that's nice." Then launched into how Mike's coach said he might break a record that season. It was like that every time. Grandpa once told me on the phone, "Stop trying to beat your brother at being their favorite. Build your own thing. One day, they'll notice what they missed." And at the time, I thought he was just trying to make me feel better. Turns out he was predicting the future without knowing it. Because one night, about a year ago, Mike posted something on Instagram that started a chain reaction none of us saw coming. It was a short video of him at some party, music blasting, him holding a drink, laughing with his teammates. The caption said, "Some of us chase real goals. Some of us just sit behind desks pretending to be important. Guess which one Mom brags about?" Then a bunch of laughing emojis. Mom liked it. So did a few aunts. One cousin tagged me with an eye emoji. That was the first time I felt something snap a little. Not anger exactly. Just this feeling like, okay, they've made the scoreboard clear. I didn't comment. Didn't text him. But that post set up everything that happened after. Stuff that ended with Mike, my parents, and half the extended family looking real different at me than they used to. And it all started because they didn't bother to ask what event I invited them to. By the next morning, a couple of my old classmates had tagged me under it with laughing emojis. Some wrote things like rough or dang bro, like they were watching a fight instead of my family calling me irrelevant. Mom commented, "So proud of you, champ," under Mike's post, which felt like extra salt on the wound. The post didn't blow up outside our small circle, but it was enough. People I hadn't talked to in years saw it. A friend from high school messaged me, "Man, your brother's a tool?" I just said, "Yeah." Didn't feel like saying more. The thing is, this wasn't new behavior for Mike. He's always been like this. If he wasn't rubbing in some football stat, it was the car mom bought him at 17, or the apartment they helped him get near campus. He once told me at Thanksgiving that I should aim higher than being average, like he was giving me life advice while our parents nodded along. I didn't respond online because honestly, what was I going to say? Actually, I have a good job? That just makes you look defensive. Instead, I focused on work. At the time, I was leading a small product team at a mid-sized tech company. We'd been working on a tool for months, and around then, we landed a deal with a regional client that meant a big bonus for the team and a title bump for me. It wasn't flashy like sports, but it was the kind of thing people in my field respected. I didn't post about it publicly. I told Nora, told Grandpa Joe over the phone. He was happy for me, said, "Keep stacking wins. People notice even if they act blind." That same week, Mike sent me a private message on Instagram. "You could have been something if you tried harder. Don't blame mom for backing a winner." No punctuation. Like he was too busy being successful to type properly. I stared at it for a minute, typed "cool," and left it at that. He replied with a laughing emoji. Nora saw the message later when we were watching TV. She asked if I was okay. I said yeah, because what else was there to say? None of this was new. The next day, Grandpa Joe called me after one of my cousins told him about the post. He was angry in that quiet way he gets, where he talks slow like he's trying not to yell. He said, "Son, you don't have to clap back. Build your life. Let the scoreboard talk later." I told him about the promotion. He said he wished he lived closer so we could celebrate in person. Then he asked about Nora, how she was doing, if the wedding plans were moving along. Because yeah, by then Nora and I were already engaged. We'd kept it low-key, no big announcements. When we finally picked a date, a Saturday in the fall at Nora's aunt's place, I texted my parents and Mike, "Hey, I've got an important event coming up this fall. Date's October 14th. Would love for you to be there. It's locked in, can't move it." Mom replied, "That's Mike's last regular season game before playoffs. We'll be there supporting him." I didn't correct her or add details. If they cared, they'd ask. They didn't. Nora asked if I wanted to tell them it was the wedding. I said no. If they cared, they'd ask. Meanwhile, the Instagram post finally faded after a couple weeks. People moved on. Mike kept posting clips from games. Mom kept sharing them with captions like, "So proud of my boy." Grandpa Joe kept calling me every Sunday, asking about work, about Nora, about life. He never brought up the post again, just said, "Tell me when the big day is. I'll be there in my best suit. Haven't worn it since your grandma's funeral, so it's about time it saw some good news." I gave him the date. He wrote it down on a calendar he keeps by the fridge. He said he wouldn't miss it for the world. Meanwhile, my parents never asked. Not once. And that's how October 14th stayed on their calendar as Mike's game day instead of Sam's wedding day. I guess to explain why the wedding day ended up the way it did, I should backtrack a bit to when I actually proposed to Nora. It was March last year. We went on this short weekend trip to a cabin 2 hours out of the city. Nothing fancy, just a quiet spot with hiking trails and a lake. I'd been carrying the ring around for 2 weeks waiting for the right time. I'm not great with big speeches, so I kept it simple. Saturday morning, we hiked up this trail that led to a lookout point over the water. It wasn't crowded that early. I pulled out the ring, managed to say something about wanting her with me in every chapter of my life, and that was it. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the thing. She laughed, said yes immediately, hugged me so hard I lost my balance for a second. No audience, no cameras, just us and a couple birds somewhere in the trees. When we got back home, I called to say I'd proposed. Mom said, "Oh, that's nice," and immediately pivoted to Mike's off-season tournament. Dad murmured, "Congrats, son." That was the whole reaction. Nora didn't say anything at the time, but later she asked if that was normal. I said yeah. For the next few months, every time we saw my parents, Mom talked about Mike's training schedule, his stats, his chances for playoffs. Not one question about our plans. Around summer, I found out something else that just cemented everything for me. One of my cousins mentioned that my parents had paid for Mike's new sports agent and some advanced training camp out of state. Big money stuff. I asked how Mike afforded all that, and the cousin said, "Oh, your folks helped. Didn't you know?" No, I didn't. Apparently they used what little was left of that same emergency fund they dipped into years ago. the college fund that was supposed to help me with grad school before it ran out. I remember just sitting there for a while, letting it sink in. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was the pattern. Everything for Mike. Scraps for me, if that. I didn't argue with them, didn't argue with. I didn't bring it up at all. I just told Nora, we're not waiting for them to be excited about our wedding. We're doing it our way. We picked October 14th because it was the only weekend the venue Nora's aunt owned was free in the fall. It was this big backyard with string lights, space for tables, a small dance floor, and a nice view of the hills behind it. Perfect for what we wanted. Simple, private, nothing huge. We invited maybe 60 people. Close friends, some of Nora's family, my grandpa Joe, a few cousins I actually talked to. I told him I wanted him to walk me down the aisle since mom and dad couldn't be bothered. He went quiet for a second, then said he'd be honored. Meanwhile, mom kept posting on Facebook about Mike's upcoming game, sharing his highlight reels, talking about scouts possibly being there. Not one word about my event. Dad didn't say anything either. He just stayed quiet like always. By September, everything for the wedding was set. Nora handled decorations with her aunt. I handled the guest list and food. My parents never once checked in. Mike sent me one text in late September. Hope your thing goes good. Mom said it's same day as my game. Bad timing, lol. I didn't reply. Looking back, that was the point where I stopped expecting anything from them at all. October 14th last year came fast. Nora and I stayed at her aunt's place the night before so we wouldn't have to rush in the morning. She and her family had been amazing, helping with decorations, organizing chairs, setting up lights. By sunrise, the backyard looked perfect. It wasn't some huge ballroom wedding, but it felt right. String lights across the yard, tables lined with simple flowers, a rented arch for the ceremony, and a small setup for the DJ in the corner. The weather was cool, but clear. People started arriving around noon. My college friends flew in from 3 different states. 2 cousins I hadn't seen in years drove 6 hours to be there. Everyone kept asking if my parents were coming. I told them no. They had other plans. Nobody pressed me on it right then. Grandpa Joe showed up in his old dark suit looking sharp. He walked straight over, hugged me, and handed me a small box. Your grandma wanted this passed down, he said. Inside was her locket. She told me to give it to the one kid who showed up for others the way people showed up for him. I just nodded. Didn't trust myself to talk. The ceremony started at 2. Grandpa Joe walked me to the arch while Nora's dad walked her. Our friend Amanda officiated. She's got the kind of voice that makes everything sound official, even though she mostly reads poetry at open mics. We kept the vows short. Neither of us wanted to drag it out. When Amanda said we were married, everyone cheered, someone popped one of those confetti tubes, and the DJ played a song Nora loved from college. We did photos right after. A professional photographer handled the main shots, but people snapped their own too. My cousins wanted a big family picture. That's when someone asked again where my parents were. I said, Mike had a game. They couldn't make it. A couple of relatives exchanged looks but didn't comment. Grandpa Joe leaned toward me at one point and said, they're going to regret this. Dinner was buffet style. Barbecue, pasta, salad, nothing fancy but plenty of it. Nora's aunt knew a caterer who gave us a discount, and people went back for seconds. We paid for the wedding ourselves. No loans, no help from my parents, just us and Nora's aunt giving us a break on the space. While folks were eating, one of my dad's sisters, Aunt Linda, took a few pictures of the ceremony and posted them on Facebook. I didn't think much about it then. I wasn't on my phone anyway. We'd planned to go completely offline once the night ended. After dinner, we had a small first dance, then opened the floor. Some kids ran around playing tag near the fence. People laughed, told stories, stayed late. It felt like what weddings are supposed to feel like, friends and family actually being present. Around 9 p.m., we wrapped things up. Guests started leaving in groups. My college buddies offered to help clean up, but Nora's aunt waved them off, said she'd handle it in the morning. Grandpa Joe hugged us both and said, I haven't danced in 20 years. I'm going to pay for it tomorrow, but it was worth it. We promised to call him once we got back from our trip. The plan was simple. We'd leave the next morning for a short honeymoon, no phones, no work, just a week off. We both wanted to disconnect completely. Before bed, I glanced at my phone once. Dozens of notifications already from relatives reacting to Aunt Linda's post. A few messages from cousins saying things like, your mom's comment section is going wild. I put the phone face down and didn't open anything. Figured it could wait until after the trip. The next morning, we loaded the car, waved goodbye to Nora's aunt, and drove off. It felt good leaving everything behind for a while. No calls, no texts, no drama for 7 straight days. Just us, some hiking trails, a couple small towns we'd never visited, and quiet evenings. I didn't know it yet, but while we were gone, that Facebook post was spreading through our parents' whole community. People they'd known for decades were sharing it, commenting on it, asking why they weren't at their own son's wedding. By the time we got home, things had completely blown up. When Nora and I got back a week later, I turned my phone on for the first time since the wedding. It barely loaded before notifications started coming in nonstop. Missed calls, texts, voicemails, tags on Facebook, dozens of them. At first, I thought something serious had happened, like an accident. But then I opened Messenger and saw a wall of messages about Aunt Linda's wedding post. She'd uploaded maybe 10 pictures, us at the ceremony, Grandpa Joe giving a little toast, the dance floor. Her caption said, "Beautiful day celebrating Sam and Nora." Some folks chose other priorities, but the rest of us had a wonderful time. That line, "some folks chose other priorities," was what set everything off. People from our hometown started sharing it with comments like, "Wait, his parents didn't go?" And "Didn't they miss his graduation too?" A couple people even tagged my mom directly asking if it was true. By the time I was scrolling, it had spread through local groups, old neighbors, even people from our church growing up. It wasn't viral like millions of strangers seeing it, but in our parents' community, everyone knew. Under my aunt's photos, Mom commented, "He never told us it was a wedding." People immediately pointed out she hadn't asked. That was the whole problem, boiled down to a thread. Meanwhile, my inbox was full of messages from Mom, ranging from angry to begging. The first ones were pure rage. "How dare you humiliate us like this?" Then, "Your aunt had no right to post that." And the best one, "You should have told us it was your wedding." Like she wasn't the one ignoring my texts for months. After a few hours, the tone switched. "Please call me. We need to talk." Then, "People won't stop messaging me. I can't sleep." And finally, "This is tearing our family apart." Mike sent his own set of texts, full of attitude like always. "Real classy move, bro." Then, "You made Mom look bad on purpose." He even threw in, "You're pathetic for hiding your wedding like that." Like I was the villain here. I didn't answer any of them. The real hit came from Grandpa Joe. While we were gone, he drove 3 hours to visit my parents in person, sat them down in their own living room, and told my dad he was ashamed of him for letting this happen. My cousin who lives nearby said Grandpa didn't yell, but his words landed hard. He told Dad, "You've let that woman run this house into the ground while your son learned to stop expecting anything from you." According to my cousin, Dad just sat there pale, like someone pulled the plug out of him. After Grandpa left, Dad called me. I let it go to voicemail because we were still unpacking. He left a message saying he was sorry, that he felt sick for missing the wedding, that he knew he failed as a father, said he told Mom things were going to change or he was done. That surprised me. My dad's been quiet my whole life. Hearing he finally put his foot down felt strange. Mom kept messaging, though. After the angry ones came the guilt trips. She wrote things like, "I'm your mother. I deserve a chance to explain." Then, "You don't know how hard this has been on me." She even tried, "Your father is talking crazy, saying things he doesn't mean." By the end of the week, she was straight up begging, "Please don't cut us off." Then, "I'll do anything to make this right." While all this was happening, Aunt Linda texted me saying, "I didn't think my post would cause this much drama. I just wanted to celebrate you guys." I told her it wasn't her fault. On top of that, other relatives started calling me. A couple of Mom's sisters were mad at me for making her look bad. They said she was heartbroken, crying all day, embarrassed in front of her friends. I told them she embarrassed herself by skipping my wedding for a football game. Dad's side of the family mostly backed me. A few cousins even posted supportive comments under Aunt Linda's pictures. Stuff like, "Sam deserved better," and "About time someone said it." The whole thing reached another level when Mike's big game, the one my parents chose instead, went badly. His team lost, and he got benched in the second half after throwing 2 interceptions. They still slipped into the playoffs on a tiebreaker, but got bounced in the first round the following week. People online started joking about how he skipped his brother's wedding for that performance. Some of his own teammates commented laughing emojis under posts about it. Mike texted me again after that, furious. Said I'd curse the season with my drama. I didn't reply. By the end of the week, Dad texted again asking to meet in person. He said he wanted to talk man to man without Mom there first. I agreed, but only after telling Nora everything. She said she'd back whatever decision I made, but didn't want me letting them guilt me into anything. That's when I realized things were only getting messier before they got clearer. Dad, pick the diner 2 towns over. Said he didn't want anyone overhearing. When I got there, he was already sitting at a booth near the back. Coffee in front of him, no food. He looked older than I remembered, like the last couple of weeks had taken years off him. He didn't waste time. As soon as I sat down, he said, "I owe you an apology." I didn't say anything, just waited. He looked at his coffee like he was scared of eye contact. "I should have been at your wedding. I should have been at a lot of things. Your graduations, your games, all of it. I let your mother run everything because I didn't want fights in the house. I thought keeping the peace was the same thing as being a good dad. It wasn't. It was the most direct thing I'd ever heard from him. He said he told Mom if she didn't start fixing things with me, he was done. He'd spent the last week on the couch after Grandpa Joe's visit because he couldn't even look at her without thinking about what Grandpa said. He said Grandpa told him he failed as both a son and a father. Then he said he wanted to start making things right. Not just words, actual changes. He said he wanted counseling, was going to pay back what he took from my college fund even if it took years, and wasn't letting Mom's excuses run the show anymore. He didn't write every check, but he let it happen, and he said as much. I told him I appreciated the apology, but this wasn't something a few checks and therapy sessions would magically fix. He nodded and said he knew. Said he was ready to prove it with actions. We sat there a while, not talking much. When the waitress came, he ordered pie for both of us like that would make things less heavy. It didn't, but I ate it anyway. 2 days later, Mom texted asking to meet too. This time with both of them. Nora came with me. I wasn't going to sit through whatever this was alone. We met at the same diner. Mom looked wrecked. Puffy eyes, messy hair, like she hadn't been sleeping. She started right in with, "You didn't tell us it was your wedding. If you had, we would have been there." And I told her I invited them to an event. And she didn't even ask what it was before saying Mike's game was more important. She tried saying it was a misunderstanding, that she assumed it wasn't major because I didn't push. I said, "That's the problem. You never cared enough to ask?" She started crying. Not quiet tears either. Full-on sobbing into a napkin. The waitress kept glancing over. Mom said she thought she was supporting the child who needed it most. That Mike's career had a window of opportunity, and she wanted to give him every chance. I said she didn't support him. She obsessed over him and forgot she had another kid. I told her about the college fund, the graduations, the birthdays she skipped, listed them out so she couldn't act like this was about one wedding. She kept saying she was sorry. I told her sorry didn't erase years of choices. Dad stayed quiet except to say he was starting counseling, and she should come too. He said things were changing whether she liked it or not. By the end of the meal, I told them I wasn't cutting them off, but I wasn't pretending everything was fine either. I told them if they wanted a relationship, it was going to take time and actual effort. No more one-sided excuses. Mom nodded through tears. Dad just looked tired, but said he understood. The next day, Mike texted asking to meet man to man. We met at the park near my apartment. He showed up in his team hoodie, looking annoyed before we even started talking. He said he was under pressure from scouts, coaches, his whole season falling apart. He said the wedding thing blew up bigger than it should have. I told him it blew up because our parents spent years acting like I didn't exist while he rubbed it in my face. He said he didn't ask to be the favorite. I said, "Yeah, but you sure enjoyed it." He didn't deny it, just kicked at the gravel near his feet and said, "People hate me now because of this." I told him people hated what he represented, a family that put one kid on a throne and ignored the other. He asked if we were good. I said we weren't enemies, but we weren't brothers either. Not right now. He didn't have anything to say to that. When I got home, Grandpa Joe called to check in. I told him about the talks. He said he was proud I kept my head and didn't get dragged into another fight. "Stick to what you said and let time do the talking," he told me. 2 days later, my boss offered me a lead role on a new product line at work. Bigger responsibility, better pay. I accepted. For the first time in weeks, I felt like something in my life was moving forward, while the rest of them were stuck dealing with the mess they made. By winter, things had settled down, at least on my side. Nora and I moved into a bigger apartment closer to work, and I started the new role leading the product team. The extra pay meant we could finally start saving for a house instead of just talking about it. Dad kept his word about the money. Every month, like clockwork, he sent a small transfer labeled College Fund Payback. Sometimes $20, sometimes $50. Not big amounts, but enough to show he wasn't just talking. He even wrote little notes like month 1 or getting there. It wasn't about the money anymore anyway. It was about him actually doing something for once. He also told me he started going to counseling. Said it was strange at first, but he was learning how to actually speak up instead of keeping the peace by staying silent. I didn't push him for details, just said I was glad he was doing it. Mom went with him a couple times, according to Dad. He said the counselor told her point blank she needed to stop living through Mike's life and actually look at the damage she caused. I don't know if she took it to heart. She did text me a few times saying she was sorry again, but I didn't answer right away. When I finally did, I told her I wasn't interested in hearing more apologies. I wanted to see actual change. If she wanted a relationship, she had to stop acting like nothing happened and start proving things were different now. She said she understood. I wasn't sure if she really did, but at least the conversation stopped being about her crying and started being about what she was going to do moving forward. Mike stayed mostly quiet after that park conversation. He had a rough end to his season. First round playoff exit, no scouts knocking with offers like he expected. He posted less online too, probably tired of people leaving comments about how he skipped my wedding and lost the game anyway. He texted once in December saying people still thought he was the villain of the family. I told him that was because he acted like one for years. He said that wasn't fair. I told him fair would have been me having parents who cared about more than his football stats. He didn't reply after that. On Christmas, Dad came alone to visit us. Said Mom stayed home because she didn't want to make things awkward. He brought a small gift for Nora, a set of baking dishes she actually needed, and a framed photo from our wedding he had printed. Said he got it from Aunt Linda and wanted us to have it. It was the first time he'd given me anything personal in years. We ate lunch, talked about work, about Grandpa Joe coming to visit in the spring. Nothing heavy. When he left, he said he was proud of me. Simple words, but he'd never said them before. By February, Nora and I were looking at houses online. Nothing rushed, just seeing what was out there. My job was going well, she was getting more photography clients, and life finally felt like it belonged to us instead of being tied up in family drama. Grandpa Joe came out to see us in March. We drove him to this big park with hiking trails and a lake. He used a cane now, but insisted on walking as far as he could. Said it felt good to breathe fresh air after winter. He told me he was proud of how I handled everything. Said most people either explode or cut everyone off completely, but I drew lines and stuck to them. Said that takes more strength than yelling. We sat on a bench looking out at the water. He told me about when he was younger and finally stood up to his own father about something. Said it didn't fix everything overnight, but it changed the way people treated him from then on. Driving back, I thought about how different things felt now. Not perfect, but quiet. No daily drama, no constant texts demanding attention, no fights about Mike. Just my life, moving forward. A week later, I posted one photo from the wedding on my own page. Nothing dramatic, just me, Nora, and Grandpa Joe standing under the lights in the backyard. My caption said, "I'm good. Built my own thing. With people who show up." That was it. No hashtags, no long explanation, no comments left on. After that, I put my phone away, sat on the couch with Nora and Grandpa, and watched the sun go down through the window. For the first time in years, it felt like everything was finally where it belonged. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way. My wife declared, "Not tonight or any night," so I redirected my time, attention, and resources. A couple of days later, she is asking for forgiveness, but I am done. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. I, 34 male, still remember the exact moment when those words left Jessica's, 32 female lips. Not tonight or any night. The finality in her voice made my body go cold. We'd been married for 6 years, and yeah, things hadn't been perfect lately, but I never expected something so final about our intimate life. Some background about me. I'm a marketing manager at a mid-sized tech company in the Midwest. Nothing fancy, but it pays the bills, and I've been steadily climbing the ladder. Been there about 8 years now. I met Jessica in college during our junior year. She was studying psychology, I was in business. We clicked right away. Both of us were ambitious but down to earth. Dated for 3 years before getting married in a modest ceremony with about 80 guests, mostly family and close friends. Jessica worked as an HR consultant and made decent money. We bought a 3-bedroom house in a nice suburb about 4 years ago. No kids yet. We were both focused on our careers first. I always thought we had a good thing going. We both contributed to the household, took vacations twice a year, usually one beach trip and one visiting family, had a decent social circle of other couples our age. Pretty normal life, you know? Nothing extraordinary, but stable and comfortable. At least that's what I thought. That evening started like any other normal day. I came home from work tired after a 10-hour day dealing with client bullshit and a presentation that didn't go as well as I hoped. I was looking forward to seeing Jessica, maybe maybe ordering some takeout, watching a movie, the usual stuff couples do. The moment I walked in, I could tell something was off. She was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone with this weird intensity. We had dinner while talking about boring stuff. Her coworkers' drama, my project deadline, the usual crap. Then, we moved to the living room where she continued scrolling through her phone, probably on one of those feminist Instagram accounts she'd been obsessed with lately, while I watched some random show on TV. When I leaned over to kiss her neck, something that used to make her smile, she pulled away sharp like I'd tried to stab her or something. "Don't," she said, not even looking up from her damn screen. "I'm not in the mood." "You haven't been in the mood for weeks now," I replied, trying hard not to sound frustrated even though I totally was. "Is everything okay?" That's when she put down her phone, looked me straight in the eyes with this cold expression I'd never seen before, and delivered those crushing words, "Not tonight or any night. I'm done with that part of our relationship." My mind raced through a million possible responses, but I just sat there like an idiot, my mouth probably hanging open. How do you even reply to someone suddenly ending physical intimacy in a marriage? No explanation, no room for discussion, just a one-sided decision that affected us both. "What exactly do you mean?" I finally managed to ask, hoping I misunderstood. "Exactly what I said," she continued, her voice weirdly calm like she was explaining something to a child. "I'm comfortable with our life together, the house, our social circle, the stability, but I'm no longer interested in physical intimacy with you or any man. I've been reading a lot about how women are conditioned to provide physical affection to men, and I've decided I'm not participating in that patriarchal expectation anymore. You can accept it or not, that's your choice." Holy shit. She'd been getting deeper into that radical feminist stuff online recently, but I never thought it would affect our relationship. I was completely blindsided. "So you're just unilaterally deciding that our marriage doesn't include physical intimacy anymore? Without any discussion?" I asked, trying to understand. "I don't need your permission to set boundaries with my own body," she replied, her tone getting that edge I'd come to recognize whenever she was quoting something from her online groups. "The fact that you think this requires a discussion just shows how entitled men are to women's bodies." I sat back, completely stunned. "Jessica, this isn't about entitlement. This is about our relationship, about connection and intimacy between partners who supposedly love each other. Love doesn't mean I have to perform physical acts I no longer want to participate in," she countered. "When did this change? When did you stop wanting to be with me that way?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Just 2 months ago, things had seemed normal," she shrugged. "It's been building for a while. I've just finally found the courage to vocalize it instead of performing for your benefit." That night, I slept on the couch. Not because she asked me to, but because I couldn't bear to lie next to someone who had just shattered my understanding of our entire relationship. The next few days were weird as hell. We continued living together, eating together, even watching TV together, all while this invisible wall had been built between us. She acted like her declaration was as ordinary as announcing she wanted to change grocery stores or something, not the complete reshaping of our marriage. I tried bringing up counseling over breakfast 3 days after her announcement. I found a couples therapist with good reviews. "I think we should talk to someone about what's going on between us." "We don't need therapy," she responded dismissively while rolling her eyes. "There's nothing wrong with me, and I'm not going to be pressured into physical intimacy I don't want just because society expects it. Maybe you should get therapy for your dependency on female validation." Jesus Christ. Of course she was right about not being pressured. I would never do that. But her complete unwillingness to even talk about this sudden change left me feeling like I was living with a stranger wearing my wife's face. Everything I said was twisted to make me sound like some kind of oppressor. At night, laying on my side of our now purely functional bed, I'd moved back from the couch, determined not to be displaced in my own home. I'd stare at the ceiling wondering how I missed the gradual breakdown of our connection. Had I been so absorbed in work that I failed to notice her pulling away? Or had she hidden her feelings until reaching some breaking point I never saw coming? I reviewed our recent history, looking for signs. Sure, our sex life had slowed down somewhat over the past year, but that seemed normal for a couple married 6+ years, both working demanding jobs. We still had date nights, still held hands during movies, still told each other, "I love you," before bed, or at least we had until recently. One thing became real clear real fast. I was now in a marriage where I was neither wanted nor needed in any meaningful way. I was simply convenient, a contributor to bills, a social partner for couple-oriented gatherings, a housemate who helped maintain our outward image of marital success. Just another evil man she could point to when talking to her new friends about how she was setting boundaries. I tried one more time to understand, catching her on a Saturday morning when we were both home. "Jessica, I'm trying to respect your feelings, but I need to understand better what's happening. Did I do something wrong? Is there something I can change?" She sighed dramatically, like my question was the most exhausting thing she'd ever heard. "This is exactly the problem with men. You think everything is about you. This is about my journey and my autonomy. The fact that you're making it about what you did wrong just proves my point. But we're married, I said, frustration building. Your decisions affect me too. So what? You think your entitlement to my body outweighs my right to control it? This is why the patriarchy persists, because men like you can't handle women making their own choices. I walked away from that conversation feeling completely hopeless. There was no reasoning with her, no finding common ground. She had created a narrative where any disagreement with her position just confirmed her worldview about oppressive men. 2 weeks after her declaration, I found myself sitting in my car outside our house, unable to summon the energy to go inside. What was waiting for me there? Another evening of polite coexistence with someone who had unilaterally changed the terms of our relationship without any real explanation? Another lecture about how I was part of the problem for expecting basic human connection in a marriage? That's when I realized I had a choice to make. I could continue living in this emotional desert, hoping for rain that would never come, or I could redirect my time, attention, and resources towards something or someone that offered at least the possibility of growth. As I finally walked through our front door, a plan was forming in my mind. Not revenge or some dramatic confrontation, at least not yet, but something more powerful, a complete redirection of my life's energy. If she had moved on from me without physically leaving, maybe I could do the same. My redirection began with small changes. I set my alarm for 5:30 a.m., a full hour before she would wake up. Those quiet morning hours quickly became sacred to me, time that was completely my own, free from her judgmental stares and passive-aggressive comments. I started with 20 minutes of meditation, something I'd always dismissed as impractical with my busy schedule. To my surprise, that brief period of morning stillness helped clear my mind of the constant thoughts about my failing marriage. Next came physical exercise. Nothing dramatic at first, just basic push-ups, sit-ups, and a short run around the neighborhood. By the time she emerged from our bedroom, I had already showered, dressed, and started my day with purpose. "You're up early," she commented on the third day, finding me sipping coffee and reading at the kitchen table. The slight annoyance in her voice was obvious. She was used to me being half asleep while she dominated the morning space. "Just making some changes," I replied casually, not offering any further explanation. She didn't ask for one, just made some comment under her breath about toxic masculinity and exercise culture that I pretended not to hear. The second week, I joined a gym near my office. Instead of rushing home after work to an increasingly uncomfortable environment, I spent an hour working out. The physical exertion became a form of therapy. Each rep pushed out another fragment of resentment and self-pity. I started fantasizing about the future, one where Jessica wasn't the center of my universe. I also reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during my marriage, guys Jessica had always disliked for being too masculine or problematic. Nothing dramatic, just casual lunches and after-work drinks with soda or coffee. I was careful not to mention my marital situation. These meetings weren't about seeking sympathy or bad-mouthing my wife. They were about rebuilding connections that had nothing to do with my identity as a husband to an increasingly hostile woman. What was really interesting was realizing how many other guys were going through similar shit. Not identical, but the same pattern. Wives or girlfriends who had gradually transformed into critical strangers, constantly finding fault with normal male behavior while expecting the financial benefits and emotional support to continue unchanged. My buddy Chris, 36 million, was dealing with a girlfriend who had suddenly decided that his video gaming hobby was problematic, despite having dated him for 3 years, knowing it was his main way to decompress. My college friend Mark, 35 million, couldn't post anything on social media without his wife publicly commenting to correct his thinking on various social issues. "It's like they want us to be both mind readers and punching bags," Chris said during one of our lunch meetups. "You can't win." That phrase stuck with me. You can't win, not if you keep playing by constantly changing rules you had no say in creating. So maybe the answer was to stop playing altogether and create my own game. I started setting aside money in a separate account Jessica couldn't access. Nothing dramatic that would affect our household contributions, just redirecting my discretionary spending and slowly building a safety net. If nothing else, it gave me a sense of control in a situation where I felt increasingly powerless. 1 month into my redirection, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. The daily workouts had started reshaping my body. Shoulders broader, stomach flatter. My posture had improved, and the constant tension that had knotted my shoulders for months had eased. But the most significant change was in my eyes. They looked focused, alive in a way they hadn't been since her declaration. I updated my wardrobe next. Nothing flashy or desperate, just well-fitted clothes that suited my improving physique and projected confidence. When I wore a new shirt to dinner with friends, several people commented on how good I looked. "You've lost weight, haven't you?" our friend Melissa asked during a dinner party. "Just been taking better care of myself," I replied, with a smile. Jessica noticed too, though she tried to disguise her interest with criticism. "Isn't that shirt a little tight?" she asked one morning as I was getting ready for work. "Seems like you're trying way too hard." Very midlife crisis energy. I just smiled and left without responding, which seemed to annoy her even more. The redirection extended to my finances as well. We always maintained separate accounts alongside our joint one for household expenses. I continued contributing my share to our joint obligations, but redirected my discretionary spending. The expensive trip to a women-only retreat in Costa Rica that Jessica had been hinting about for our anniversary. That money went instead into a high-yield investment account under only my name. I also invested in a photography workshop, a passion I had abandoned years ago after Jessica complained about the time it took away from us. Ironic now, considering her stance. Photography got me outdoors on weekends, hiking to capture landscapes at dawn when the light was perfect. These solo excursions became another form of meditation. Behind the camera, framing each shot, I found a state of flow that allowed me to forget everything else. I invested in decent equipment, nothing outrageous, but a good DSLR camera and a couple of quality lenses. My first few attempts were pretty amateur, but I watched tutorials online and practiced constantly. Soon I was capturing images I was genuinely proud of. Mountain landscapes bathed in early morning light, close-ups of frost patterns on fallen leaves, dramatic storm clouds gathering over fields. I started posting my work online, connecting with other photographers and building a small following that appreciated my eye for composition. Some of my photos even started selling as prints through an online marketplace, creating a small but growing side income that went straight into my separate account. "Where have you been going so early on Saturdays?" she asked after several weeks of my new routine, the entitlement in her voice crystal clear. She was used to me being available whenever she wanted. "Taking photographs," I answered simply. "Since when are you into photography?" The accusatory tone, like I needed her permission to have hobbies. "I've always been into it. I just haven't had the time to pursue it until now." Her expression suggested she wanted to ask more, but couldn't quite figure out how, or perhaps didn't want to show too much interest in my life after having so deliberately stepped back from it. "Well, I needed help with some things around the house last weekend, but you were nowhere to be found," she complained. Typical, no interest in my activities, just how they inconvenienced her. "You could have texted," I replied calmly. "Phone works even in the mountains." "I shouldn't have to text my own husband to get basic help," she snapped. I just shrugged. Things change. Those two words hung in the air between us, and I saw something flicker across her face. The first hint that she was beginning to realize her declaration might have consequences she hadn't anticipated. At work, my renewed focus paid off big time. I approached projects with clarity and confidence that hadn't been there during the months of marital distress. My boss, Rob, 45 male, noticed the change. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," he said, after I successfully landed a major client that had been on the fence for months. "You're on fire lately." The compliment meant more than it should have. After months of feeling unwanted at home, professional recognition filled some of the void. Not completely, but enough to keep moving forward. I volunteered for projects that required travel, something I'd avoided in the past to spend more time with Jessica. A 3-day conference in Chicago, a week-long training in Denver, a client meeting in Boston. Each trip was a breath of fresh air. Hotel rooms where I could spread out without judgment. Meals where no one made snide comments about my choices. Conversations with people who didn't view every interaction through an ideological lens. During my Denver trip, I met up with an old college friend, Tom, who had moved there years ago. We hiked in the mountains, and I took some of my best photos yet. When I posted them online, my follower count jumped significantly, and I sold 3 prints within a week. Online, my follower count jumped significantly, and I sold 3 prints within a week. "You know, you could actually turn this into a serious side business," Tom said, as we rested at a scenic overlook. "Your eye for composition is really good." His casual encouragement planted a seed in my mind. What if photography wasn't just an escape? What if it could be something more substantial? A potential path to a different future? 3 months into my redirection, I was sleeping better, looking better, and performing better in nearly every aspect of my life except my marriage, which remained this empty shell of formal interactions and parallel existences. The irony wasn't lost on me. In withdrawing her affection, Jessica had inadvertently pushed me toward becoming a stronger version of myself. It was like the universe's weird way of compensating. What Jessica didn't know was that I'd opened a separate checking account and started routing 50% of my paychecks there, including my performance bonuses. The other 50% was more than enough to cover my share of our joint expenses. I was building my escape fund, dollar by dollar. Not that I was planning to leave yet. I wanted to see how this played out first. One evening, as I prepared to leave for a photography meetup, she asked an unexpected question. "Are you seeing someone else?" The entitlement in her voice was unbelievable. She could end our physical relationship unilaterally, but still expected exclusive access to my time and attention. I paused by the door, camera bag over my shoulder. "No," I answered truthfully. "Why would you ask that?" "You've changed," she said, her voice carrying a note I couldn't identify. "You're hardly ever home anymore." The hypocrisy of her concern almost made me laugh. "I'm just redirecting my time and energy into things that fulfill me," I replied, using her own clinical approach. "Isn't that what you've been doing?" "That's different," she responded, clearly irritated that I'd used her own logic against her. "I made a personal choice about my body and autonomy, and I'm making personal choices about my time and interests," I countered. "Seems perfectly fair to me." "So you're what, punishing me?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "Not at all," I replied calmly. "I'm adapting to our new reality. You set a boundary, and I respect that. I'm simply setting boundaries of my own." She had no response to that, and I left without waiting for one. As I drove to meet my photography friends, I realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since her declaration, I wasn't desperately hoping for her to change her mind. I was too busy creating a life that no longer centered around her approval or affection. I met my photography group at a local park where we were practicing night photography techniques. Among them was a guy named David who worked for a local magazine. "These are really good," he said, looking through some of my recent shots on my camera's display. "We're always looking for local talent for our nature section. Would you be interested in submitting some work?" Just like that, another door opened. By the time I got home that night, Jessica was already in bed, probably annoyed that I hadn't been there to listen to her latest complaints about her co-workers or patriarchal oppression. I didn't care. I had bigger things on my mind. The pivotal moment came during a company retreat 6 months into my redirection. My team had gathered at this lakeside resort for a weekend of strategic planning and team building. After a productive day of meetings, we relaxed around a fire pit, sharing stories and snacks under the stars. My colleague Emma, 29 female, who had joined the marketing department 3 months earlier, sat down beside me. Emma was pretty much Jessica's opposite, warm, supportive, and actually interested in other people's lives. "You know, when I first started, everyone told me how lucky I was to be working with you," she said, her voice quiet enough that only I could hear. "Really? Why is that?" I asked, genuinely curious. "They said you'd completely transformed the department's performance, but they also mentioned how much you've changed personally over the past few months." She hesitated, then added, "They said you used to be withdrawn, almost sad. That doesn't match the person I've known." I stared into the flames, considering how to respond. Let's just say I went through some personal challenges and decided to focus on what I could control, rather than what I couldn't. She nodded thoughtfully. "Well, whatever you did worked. You seem completely in your element now." As our conversation continued into the evening, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't with anyone in a long time. Emma was intelligent and insightful, with a sharp sense of humor that repeatedly caught me off guard. We discovered shared interests in photography and hiking, and she seemed genuinely impressed when I showed her some of my recent work on my phone. "These are amazing," she said, leaning closer to swipe through the gallery. "You have a real talent. Have you considered showing these professionally?" "Actually, I just started selling some prints online, and a local magazine might feature a few," I replied, surprised at how good it felt to share this part of my life with someone who genuinely seemed to care. "That's fantastic. I'd love to see more of your work sometime," she said, smiling in a way that made me acutely aware of how long it had been since someone had looked at me with genuine admiration instead of criticism. The warmth of her shoulder against mine sent an unexpected jolt through my system, a stark reminder of how long it had been since I'd experienced even casual physical contact. I carefully shifted away, uncomfortable with my reaction. Despite the situation with Jessica, I wasn't going to be that guy who starts something new before ending the old. Later, as the group dispersed to their cabins, Emma walked alongside me on the path. "Some of us are planning a sunrise hike tomorrow before the meetings start," she mentioned. "You should join. Perfect lighting for those landscape shots you love." I agreed, and the next morning found myself standing atop a ridge with Emma and 2 other colleagues as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I took dozens of photographs, but found my lens repeatedly drawn to Emma's profile against the dramatic backdrop. Emma represented everything I'd been missing: genuine interest, mutual respect, actual conversation rather than lectures. But I knew I needed to resolve my situation with Jessica before even considering anything else. When I returned home Sunday evening, Jessica was in the kitchen preparing dinner, something she hadn't done for us in months. The timing was suspicious as hell. "How was the retreat?" she asked, her tone unusually attentive. "Productive," I replied, setting down my bag. "We finalized the strategic plan for next quarter." She nodded, then asked, "I saw some of the photos you posted. Beautiful location." "It was," I agreed, wondering at her sudden interest. "That woman in some of the pictures, is she on your team?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't realized Emma had featured prominently in my uploads. "That's Emma, our new marketing specialist," I answered neutrally. "She's very pretty," Jessica observed, her eyes studying my face. The territorial behavior was rich coming from someone who had explicitly rejected me. "I hadn't really noticed," I lied, feeling oddly defensive. "Really? You've taken about a dozen photos with her in them." Seems like you noticed plenty. The accusatory tone was unmistakable. I chose my next words carefully. She happened to be in the frame during our group activities. Why are you asking about this? You made it very clear that certain aspects of our relationship are over. You don't get to dictate who I spend time with professionally. She turned back to the stove, clearly annoyed that I wasn't apologizing or explaining myself further. Just curious about your colleagues, that's all. I have a right to know who my husband spends time with. That was the moment I decided to accelerate my exit plan. The one-sided nature of her expectations had become unbearable. The following week brought more surprises. Jessica started initiating conversations, asking about my day, even suggesting we watch shows together. She made dinner several times and didn't even pepper the conversation with her usual ideological commentary. It was like living with a completely different person, or rather, with the person I'd married years ago, before she'd transformed into a stranger. I knew exactly what was happening. She was trying to re-establish control, to pull me back into orbit now that she sensed I was drifting away. The realization strengthened my resolve. This wasn't about revenge. It was about self-preservation. Two key events aligned to create the perfect opportunity for my freedom. First, I received a significant promotion at work, with a substantial raise and more travel opportunities. I kept this information to myself, not sharing it with Jessica, despite her increasingly desperate attempts to engage with me. Second, through my professional network, I learned that Jessica's company was planning major layoffs due to a merger. Her department was likely to be hit hard. This wasn't inside trading or anything illegal, just the kind of information that flows through business connections in our mid-sized city. The timing couldn't have been better. Over the past months, through my networking and new social connections, I'd learned that Jessica's company was planning these layoffs. In fact, I'd helped a colleague's spouse get hired at a competing firm 3 weeks earlier, knowing they'd need someone with Jessica's exact qualifications. I could have easily done the same for Jessica. A single phone call would have secured her an interview at minimum, but I chose not to. Instead, I accelerated my exit strategy. I consulted with a lawyer, discreetly, paying in cash from my separate account. I learned exactly what I needed to do to protect myself financially in a divorce. I documented Jessica's declaration about ending physical intimacy, her subsequent behavior, everything that might help my case. I also discovered through casual conversations that Jessica had been bad-mouthing me to her friends and family, painting herself as some kind of victim of the patriarchy while conveniently omitting her unilateral decision to fundamentally change our marriage. This sealed the deal. My escape needed to be complete and decisive. 2 weeks later, Jessica's company announced the layoffs. She came home visibly shaken. "My department might be cut next month," she said, clearly expecting sympathy. "I'm really worried." "That's tough," I responded, offering basic courtesy but nothing more. "I'm sure you'll figure it out." The layoffs happened faster than expected. The following Friday, Jessica came home in tears. "I lost my job," she sobbed. "They eliminated our entire department." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, maintaining a neutral expression. "What's your plan?" She looked shocked at my response. "My plan? I just lost my job. I need time to process this." "Of course," I replied. "Take all the time you need, but our financial obligations don't stop, so just let me know how you plan to continue contributing to the household expenses." Her jaw literally dropped. "Are you serious right now? I'm in crisis and you're asking about bills?" I shrugged. "Just being practical. We both contribute equally, right? That's always been your position." The next morning, I made my move. While Jessica was in the shower, I transferred every penny from our joint account into my private account, leaving just enough to avoid overdraft fees. Then I packed a bag with essentials and my most important possessions. When she emerged from the bathroom, I was waiting in the living room with divorce papers. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing the documents. "Divorce papers," I replied calmly. "I've realized I deserve better than a one-sided marriage with someone who unilaterally changed the terms of our relationship without discussion or compromise." Her face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, disbelief. "You can't be serious. Because I wouldn't sleep with you? That's what this is about?" "No, it's about respect and reciprocity. You made a choice that affected us both, presented it as non-negotiable, and expected me to simply accept it. That's not a partnership," she scoffed. "So you're running off with your little work girlfriend? How predictable. This has nothing to do with Emma or anyone else. This is about you and me and the broken agreement between us. By the way, I've moved our joint funds into a separate account that you won't have access to until we reach a settlement." Her face paled. "You did what? You can't do that. I just lost my job. How am I supposed to pay for anything?" "Not my problem," I replied, echoing the same dismissive tone she'd used when ending our physical relationship. "You should have considered the potential consequences before making unilateral decisions about our marriage." "This is financial abuse," she shouted, tears forming in her eyes. "I need that money for basic necessities." "No, this is consequences. And speaking of necessities, the mortgage is due next week. I've calculated your half. It's listed in the documents. I'll expect your payment on time." She started to panic visibly. "Please, you can't do this. I have no income right now. I need time to find a new job. You should have thought about that before declaring not tonight or any night and treating me like an accessory to your life rather than a partner. You wanted independence from patriarchal expectations? Congratulations, you've got it. Complete financial independence too. Over the next week, Jessica's behavior changed dramatically. The feminist rhetoric disappeared, replaced by desperate pleas and attempts to renegotiate. She suggested counseling, hinted at reconsidering her stance on intimacy, even tried seduction one night, which I firmly rejected. My lawyer had advised me not to leave the house yet, so we continued living together in increasingly tense circumstances. Jessica's friends started calling me, telling me how cruel I was being, how I needed to support my wife in her time of need. I blocked their numbers one by one. Her parents reached out next, suggesting we all meet to discuss the situation. I declined politely but firmly. Your daughter made her choice months ago, I told her father over the phone. I'm simply making mine now. 2 weeks into this standoff, Jessica's desperation peaked. She had no job prospects, no access to our joint savings, and bills piling up. She approached me one evening, completely defeated. Please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. I need help. I can't do this alone. That's an interesting perspective, I replied coolly. Wasn't it you who told me that women don't need men? That marriage is just a patriarchal construct? That physical intimacy with me was something you could unilaterally end without discussion? I was wrong, she whispered. I got caught up in all these ideas without thinking about what they really meant. Please, I'll do anything. We can go to counseling, rebuild our relationship, whatever you want. The problem is, Jessica, I don't want that anymore. You showed me who you really are. Someone who views relationships as transactional, who takes what she wants and discards the rest. Now that you need something from me, suddenly you're willing to reconsider everything. That's not love or partnership. That's opportunism. I stood up, gathering my keys. I'm moving out tomorrow. The divorce papers are ready for your signature. If you contest them, I'm prepared for a legal battle that will drain what little resources you have left. If you sign them as is, I'll provide a one-time payment to help you transition to your new independent life. You planned this all along, she realized, her voice hollow. From the moment I said those words, you were planning your exit. No, I corrected her. I planned this from the moment I realized you saw me as disposable. You taught me an important lesson about self-worth, Jessica, and for that, I suppose I should thank you. I moved out the next day into a new apartment I'd secretly secured weeks earlier. Jessica signed the divorce papers without contest, receiving her settlement payment as promised. I heard through mutual friends that she moved back in with her parents in a different state, her feminist ideals apparently set aside in favor of practical needs. As for me, I continued building my new life, advancing in my career, developing my photography business on the side, maintaining my physical fitness, and yes, eventually starting a genuine relationship with Emma, who showed me what real partnership looks like. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, my first photography exhibition opened at a local gallery. Among the images on display was a striking landscape taken at dawn on that company retreat. The morning I realized I deserved better. The greatest revenge wasn't taking Jessica's financial security or even her dignity. It was becoming the man I should have been all along. Confident, self-sufficient, and unwilling to accept anything less than a genuine, reciprocal relationship. In trying to diminish me, she inadvertently set me free. Sometimes Jessica still tries to contact me, especially when she's struggling financially. I maintain minimal, business-like communication as needed to finalize any remaining legal matters, but otherwise, I've moved on completely. Our mutual friends eventually learned the full story, and most understood my position, even if they felt I was harsh in my execution. But here's the thing about consequences. They're not harsh or kind, they're just inevitable. Jessica chose to destroy the foundation of our marriage while expecting the structure to remain standing. When it collapsed, she was simply experiencing the natural outcome of her own actions. This experience taught me that self-respect isn't selfish, it's essential, and that sometimes the most powerful response to someone who treats you as disposable is to simply agree with them and walk away, not in anger or bitterness, but with the calm certainty that you deserve more than they're willing to give. So if you're reading this and recognizing your own relationship in my story, know that you have choices. You don't have to accept unilateral changes to your marriage. You don't have to diminish yourself to accommodate someone else's ideology. And most importantly, you don't have to wait for permission to start building a life that fulfills you. The person who tries to change the rules without your input is telling you exactly how much they value your voice in the relationship. Listen to what they're really saying, not just with their words, but with their actions, and then decide if that's enough for you. What you're about to hear is the story of a guy who waited tables to pay for pre-law classes. Normal gig. Decent tips. Except his boss had a special rule, something called the house's share. Sounds official, right? It wasn't. This owner was pocketing a cut of every single tip that walked through the door. And the overtime didn't exist on paper, the off-clock closing shifts, just part of the culture. So Connor did what any future attorney would do. He shut his mouth, opened a spreadsheet, and documented every last cent for 8 straight months. The Department of Labor found $340,000 in violations. 40 employees, 3 years. And the restaurant? Gone. Doors locked. Lights off. My boss stole tips from every server for 3 years and called it the house's share. I documented everything for 8 months and got the Department of Labor involved. They found $340,000 in violations. The restaurant closed. I need to get this out because it's been sitting in my chest for months, and I think people need to hear it. I'm Connor, 24 years old, pre-law student at a state school about 40 minutes outside the city. I'd been working at this Italian place called Rosario's since my sophomore year. Family-owned, white tablecloths, the kind of spot where couples go for anniversaries and parents bring their kids for graduation dinners. Not fine dining exactly, but a solid step above your average chain. The food was actually good. The owner, I'll call him Gio, ran the place like it was his kingdom. Big personality, loud laugh, always shaking hands with regulars and buying them dessert on the house. Everybody loved Gio on the surface. I got hired as a busser and worked my way up to server within about 4 months. The training process was pretty standard. Shadow the senior servers for a couple weeks, learn the menu, memorize the wine list, which I never actually had to use for anything, weirdly. Pass a test on the specials. Gio made a big deal about Rosario's standards during training, like this was the Ritz-Carlton or something. The guy had framed photos of himself with local news anchors on the wall behind the host stand. Real look-at-me energy. The money was decent, though. Friday and Saturday nights I could pull 300 or more in tips, and during the week, it was steady enough to cover rent and books. I wasn't getting rich, but I wasn't drowning either. For a college kid carrying 15 credits and working 35 to 40 hours a week, it was manageable. Barely. My apartment was a studio above a laundromat that smelled like fabric softener 24 hours a day. And I drove a 2011 Civic with a check engine light that had been on since before I bought it. So when I say manageable, I mean I wasn't eating ramen, but I wasn't exactly thriving. The tip pool was the first thing that felt off, but I didn't question it right away. Gio had this system where all tips went into a pool at the end of the night and then got divided up by a formula he kept in his head. Servers got the biggest cut, then bussers, then food runners. Fine, that's normal enough. But there was always this deduction he called the house's share. He said it covered breakage, napkin costs, credit card processing fees, stuff like that. It came out to somewhere between 8 and 12% of the total pool every single night. I remember asking one of the older servers about it my first week on the floor. This guy named Pete, who'd been there like 6 years, just shrugged and said, "That's how Gio does it." I asked if it was legal. Pete gave me this look like I'd asked if water was wet and said, "Dude, every restaurant does this." And honestly, I believed him. I didn't know any better. I was 21, I was tired, and the money after the deduction was still better than anything else I could find near campus. But here's the thing about studying pre-law. You start reading cases. You start understanding how things actually work. Second semester of my junior year, I took an employment law elective, and the professor spent an entire week on the Fair Labor Standards Act. Tip pooling came up, and I sat in that lecture hall with my laptop open, and my stomach just dropped. Employers cannot take any portion of a tip pool, period. Not for breakage, not for credit card fees, not for napkins, not for anything. The tips belong to the employees. Full stop. I went back to my apartment that night and sat on my bed staring at the wall for probably 20 minutes. I did the napkin math. If Gio was skimming 10% of the tip pool every night across a restaurant that did, conservatively, $2,000 to $3,000 in tips on a busy night, that's $200 to $300 a night just vanishing. Multiply that by 6 nights a week, 52 weeks a year, and I started feeling sick. I didn't say anything to anyone. Not yet. I went to class the next day and sat through a lecture on tort law, and I could not focus. I kept doing the math in my head. Different scenarios, different estimates. Best case, Gio was skimming 50 grand a year from his own employees. And I was one of them. Every shift I'd worked for the past 2 years, money had been taken out of my pocket by the guy who smiled at me every time I clocked in. Because I also noticed something else that same month, and it was almost worse. I was pulling close to 50 hours a week at that point, between doubles on weekends and my regular weeknight shifts. but my paychecks never showed overtime. Geo paid us a base hourly rate, the tipped minimum, which in our state was like $2.13 an hour. And then we got our tip pool share in cash at the end of each shift. But the hours on my pay stubs never went over 40. Ever. Even the week I literally worked 6 days straight covering for someone who quit. 40 hours on the dot. And then there was closing. Every server who worked the closing shift was expected to stay after their last table left to roll silverware, restock the service stations, wipe down the bar area, not even our section, the bar, mop the floor near the host stand, and sometimes help the kitchen break down the line. This took anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half depending on the night. And we were clocked out for all of it. Geo's rule was that you clock out when the last table pays. Everything after that is just part of wrapping up. He said it casually like it was nothing, like asking someone to rinse their coffee mug before they leave. But that's an hour of unpaid labor, sometimes more, multiplied by every closer, every single night. And if you tried to leave without doing the closing work, Geo would find you the next shift and give you this disappointed father routine about how the restaurant runs on teamwork and everyone has to pitch in. One time, a new server named Caleb tried to leave right after clocking out, and Geo scheduled him for lunch shifts only for the next 3 weeks. Lunches at Rosario's were dead. You'd make maybe $60 in tips on a good day. Everyone got the message after that. So let me lay out the 3 things happening at once. 1. Geo's skimming tips. 2. Geo's shaving hours to avoid paying overtime. 3. Geo's making people work off the clock. And all of it, every single piece, is illegal. I made a decision sitting at my desk that night with my employment law textbook open to Chapter 9. I was going to document everything. Not for a week, not for a month. Long enough that nobody could dismiss it. Hold on. For the listeners, this is me, not Connor. I need you to appreciate what's happening here. Most people in this situation either quit or complain to their coworker in the parking lot and do nothing. Connor sat down with his textbook like he was prepping for the bar exam and decided to build a federal case against his own boss. This is basically the plot of Ocean's 11, except instead of robbing a casino, one college kid with a 3-ring binder is robbing the casino owner of his ability to rob everyone else. The man hasn't even graduated yet, and he's already lawyering. Geo has no idea what's coming, and honestly, good. Buckle up. I started the next day. I created a spreadsheet on my laptop. Date, shift time, clock-in time, actual departure time, number of tables served, approximate tip total before pool, pool amount announced by Geo, the house's share deduction, and my actual take-home. Every shift. No exceptions. I kept a small notebook in my apron pocket and jotted down the raw numbers during my shift, then transferred them to the spreadsheet when I got home. For the POS system screenshots, I got a little creative. Geo used this older point-of-sale system, one of those touchscreen setups from like 2014 that still printed on thermal paper. At the end of every night, he'd print the tip report before dividing the pool. I started taking photos of that printout with my phone before he collected them. I'd snap the picture while pretending to check a text. Took me about 2 seconds. I got one almost every shift I worked for 8 months. I also started photographing my pay stubs the day I received them, front and back. And I kept a separate log of every time I was asked to stay after clocking out, what tasks I did, and approximately how long it took. I even started noting which other employees were there with me during the off-clock closing work. Names, dates, tasks. I bought a cheap composition notebook from the dollar store specifically for this. Black and white marble cover, the kind you used in middle school. I kept it in my car and would write down everything in the parking lot before I drove home while it was still fresh. One thing I want to mention because it mattered later. I also started paying attention to the schedule itself. Geo posted the weekly schedule on a bulletin board in the back hallway near the break area. I started taking photos of that too. Every week. Because the schedule showed what shifts people were actually assigned versus what showed up on their pay stubs. And surprise, surprise, those numbers didn't always match. Honestly, the hardest part wasn't the documenting. It was keeping my mouth shut. There were nights where I'd watch Geo pull $300 out of the tip pool and stuff it in his back pocket, and I wanted to say something so bad my teeth hurt. But I knew if I tipped him off, he'd change the system overnight and claim he'd always done it the legal way. I needed volume. I needed pattern. I needed 8 months of Gio doing the exact same thing over and over and over, so there was no way he could call it a mistake or a misunderstanding. My buddy Wes, another server, also a student but studying something with biology, he noticed I was always scribbling in that notebook. One night during a dead Tuesday, he straight up asked me what I was writing. I told him I was tracking my tips for my taxes. He laughed and said, "Dude, nobody tracks tips for their taxes." Which is true. But he bought it and moved on. There was this one night, maybe month 4 or 5 of my little operation, where I almost broke. It was a Saturday. We got destroyed. I'm talking every table full from 5:30 until close. Double sat twice, ran my legs off for 6 hours straight. The tip pool that night was somewhere around $2,800, which was insane for us. Gio announced the house's share was going to be a little higher tonight because of the volume. He took $420. $420 out of the pockets of the people who actually earned it. I went home that night and stared at my spreadsheet and added the number and watched the running total of the house's share column tick past $9,000. $9,000. Gone. In less than 5 months. And that was just from the shifts I personally worked. I wasn't even there every night. But I stuck to the plan. I had this playlist I'd put on while I updated the spreadsheet. Just random instrumental stuff. Movie soundtracks mostly. And it became kind of a ritual. Come home, eat whatever was in the fridge, usually leftover pasta from the restaurant, which is ironic, sit at my desk, log the numbers, go to bed. I treated it like homework, because honestly, that's what it was. There was this one random Tuesday around month 3 that has nothing to do with anything, but I think about it sometimes. Dead night, maybe 4 tables all evening. Wes and I were folding napkins at the service station, and this older couple at table 12 sent back their salad 3 times because the ranch dressing tasted different. Wes looked at me completely straight-faced and said, "Bro, it's ranch. It comes from a bag. It has never tasted different in the history of ranch." I almost lost it. We spent the rest of the night ranking things that taste the same every time and deciding ranch was number 1. Anyway, that has nothing to do with the story, but I think about it whenever I see ranch dressing at the grocery store now. Wait. Let me jump in here because I don't think people realize how calculated the off-clock scam is. Gio isn't forgetting to pay people. He built a system where the expectation is baked in so deep that nobody questions it. Just part of wrapping up. That's not a scheduling oversight. That's a script. He literally programmed his employees to give away free labor and feel weird about pushing back. It's like if your landlord told you rent includes mowing his lawn every Sunday and you just did it because he said it with enough confidence. This man turned a restaurant into a sweatshop with breadsticks, and nobody blinked, until Connor opened that spreadsheet. Around month 6, I started quietly reaching out to a couple of the other servers I trusted. Not a lot of people. Just 2. Wes and a woman named Dana who'd been there almost as long as Pete. I didn't come at them with the spreadsheet or the law or anything like that. I just asked simple questions. Hey, do you track your hours outside of what's on your pay stub? Have you ever noticed the house's share amount changes every night? Does it seem weird that we never get overtime even during holiday weeks? And both of them, separately, on different nights, said basically the same thing. Yeah, it's weird, but what are we supposed to do about it? I told Dana I was thinking about looking into it more seriously. She got quiet for a second and then said, "Just be careful because Gio knows people." I didn't really know what that meant and I still don't. But it spooked me a little. Not enough to stop, just enough to be more careful about who I talk to. Wes was a different story. When I asked him about the overtime thing, he actually got kind of animated. He said he'd worked a double on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day back to back, 14 hours one day, 12 the next. And his paycheck showed 40 hours for that week, even though he hadn't had a day off. He said he figured it was just how restaurants worked. I told him it wasn't. He asked what I was planning, and I told him I wasn't planning anything. I was just asking questions. I don't think he believed me, but he didn't push it. I also went to see my employment law professor during office hours. I didn't name the restaurant or Gio. I just laid out a hypothetical. Professor, if someone worked at a restaurant where the owner took a percentage of the tip pool for operating costs and also required off-clock labor and also shaved overtime hours, what would you recommend that person do? He looked at me over his glasses and said, "File with the Wage and Hour Division of the Department of Labor." He said they investigate exactly this type of thing and the employee doesn't need a lawyer to file. He also said if retaliation occurs, that's a separate violation with its own penalties. I went home that night and started drafting my complaint. The thing about a DOL wage complaint is it's not that complicated on paper. You fill out a form. You describe the violations. You attach whatever evidence you have. And then they investigate. But whatever evidence you have, that's where the game changes. Most people file complaints with nothing but their word. I had 8 months of spreadsheet data, over 100 photos of nightly tip reports, every pay stub I'd received in that time period, a log of off-clock hours with dates and coworker witnesses, and a running total of estimated losses broken down by violation type. I also did something my professor suggested in that hypothetical conversation. I estimated the total damage not just for myself, but for all employees. I used my own numbers as a baseline and extrapolated based on the number of servers, bussers, and food runners on a typical schedule. The estimate came out to somewhere around $280,000 over 3 years. The actual number, as it turned out, was higher. I filed the complaint on a Wednesday in March, walked into the local DOL field office during a gap between classes, handed over a manila folder that was about 2 inches thick, and filled out the intake form. The woman at the desk flipped through my documentation and paused. She looked up at me and asked if I had compiled all of this myself. I said yes. She said okay, pulled out a different form, some kind of priority intake sheet, and told me someone would be in contact within 2 weeks. They called in 9 days. I want to be clear about something because I think it matters. In those 9 days, I had 3 shifts at Rosario's. I served tables, I smiled at Gio when he walked by, I did the off-clock closing work, I logged everything in my notebook and transferred it to the spreadsheet when I got home. Nothing changed on the outside, but every time I looked at Gio, I kept thinking about that manila folder sitting on someone's desk at a federal building. It was surreal, like living in 2 different realities at the same time. During the day, I'm carrying plates and refilling water glasses. At night, I'm checking my phone every 30 minutes to see if anyone from the government called. Pause for a second. I just want to point out that Connor walked into a federal agency with a folder thicker than most people's college thesis and basically handed them a case on a silver platter. This isn't some guy rage posting on the internet. This is, Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A through Exhibit 473. He turned waiting tables into an 8-month undercover operation, and the DOL agent probably had to stop herself from applauding. Meanwhile, Gio's still out there shaking hands and buying people free tiramisu thinking he's the king of the castle. My guy, the castle is about to get seized. But anyway, here's where things get real. The investigator assigned to my case was a guy named Douglas. Older dude, very calm, very methodical. He called me on a Friday afternoon and said he'd reviewed my materials and wanted to schedule a meeting. We met the following Monday at the field office. He went through my spreadsheet line by line. He asked me about the POS system, the tip pool process, who announced the numbers, who distributed the cash, how the house's share was communicated. He asked about the overtime, how many hours I typically worked, what showed on my pay stubs, whether I had any communications from Gio about scheduling or hours. I gave him everything, the whole picture. Douglas barely reacted to any of it. No raised eyebrows, no wow, just methodical questions and notes. The one thing he did say, and I remember this exactly, was that the level of documentation I'd compiled was unusual for an individual complainant. He said most people come in with a general complaint and maybe a couple pay stubs. I came in with what amounted to a pre-built case file. I told him I was a pre-law student, and he kind of smiled for the first time and said that explains it. Douglas told me that based on my documentation, they'd be opening a formal investigation. He said they would conduct on-site visits, review Gio's payroll records, interview current and former employees, and audit the POS system data. He also told me that under federal law, Gio could not retaliate against me for filing the complaint. No termination, no reduction in hours, no schedule changes designed to push me out. The investigation started about 3 weeks later. I know because Gio's entire mood changed overnight. He went from the big, loud, friendly guy slapping backs and cracking jokes to this tense, short-tempered version of himself I'd never seen. He started hovering around the POS station at the end of every shift. He changed the tip pool process. Suddenly, he was printing the reports in his office and bringing out the cash already divided. No more group announcements, no more visible numbers. He also stopped making people do the off-clock closing work, just like that. One night after the last table left, he came out and said, "Everybody clock out and go home. We'll handle the rest in the morning." The other servers looked at each other like they'd just witnessed a miracle. I knew exactly what was happening. There was one other thing that happened during this stretch that I need to mention. About 2 weeks after the investigation started, Gio called a staff meeting. He never did staff meetings. Ever. In the 2.5 years I'd worked there, I could count the number of group meetings on one hand. But he gathered everyone in the dining room before service on a Tuesday and gave this speech about how Rosario's was going through some routine business reviews and that everyone should just focus on their jobs and not worry about it. He said some government stuff was happening, but it was totally normal and nothing to stress about. He was sweating. In a room that was maybe 68 degrees, this man was sweating through his dress shirt. I sat in the back row of chairs and kept my face completely blank. A couple of people looked at me. I don't know if they knew something or if I was being paranoid. Then came the part I'd been bracing for. About 5 weeks into the investigation, Gio pulled me aside after a Saturday shift. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten me. He just stood there in the back hallway near the walk-in cooler and said, "I know someone here talked to the government, and I want you to know that I've always taken care of my people. This restaurant is a family, and families don't do this to each other." I looked at him and said, "Okay, that's it, just okay." And I walked out to my car. I called Douglas on Monday morning and reported the conversation verbatim. He thanked me, said he'd document it, and told me to keep doing my job normally. The investigation ran for almost 4 months. During that time, I watched Gio slowly unravel. He fired Pete, the guy who'd been there 6 years, over something stupid, a side of sauce that went out wrong. Pete filed his own complaint. Gio cut Dana's hours from 35 to 15 a week. She filed too. 2 former employees who had quit in the previous year heard about the investigation through the grapevine and contacted the DOL on their own with their own complaints. It was like watching dominoes. Gio spent years building this system on the assumption that nobody would say anything. And once one person did, the whole thing came apart. I later found out from Douglas that during the investigation, they discovered Gio had been doing variations of this at a previous restaurant he managed before he opened Rosario's. Different name, different location, same playbook. The man had a system and he'd been running it for years. One thing that surprised me during this period was how many of my coworkers came up to me privately, not directly saying they knew I filed anything, but kind of dancing around it. One of the food runners, this kid named Miles, who was maybe 19, asked me if I knew anything about labor laws. I told him to look up the Fair Labor Standards Act and gave him the DOL website. That felt good, actually, like the information was spreading even if nobody was saying it out loud. I kept working through all of it, kept my shifts, kept my head down, kept my spreadsheet going even though by that point the evidence was already in the government's hands. Force of habit, I guess. Okay, stop. Let me paint you a picture of how this looks from Gio's side because it's almost beautiful. This man built his whole operation on the idea that minimum wage restaurant workers wouldn't know their rights. That's it. That was the entire business model. He's basically the final boss in a video game who forgot to lock the back door, and a 24-year-old with a 3-ring binder just walked straight through it. And now former employees are crawling out of the woodwork like it's a class reunion nobody invited him to. What's next? The health inspector shows up and finds the tip jar money taped under the fryer. The walls are closing in, and Gio's still out there calling his restaurant a family. Sure, Gio, the kind of family that gets investigated by the federal government. The results came down on a Thursday. Douglas called me first, which I appreciated. He said the investigation had concluded and the findings were significant. Here's what they found. $340,000 in wage violations spanning 3 years and affecting 43 employees. The breakdown was roughly this. About $170,000 in illegal tip pool deductions, close to $100,000 in unpaid overtime, and the rest in off-the-clock labor violations. Those are the numbers I was told. The official report probably breaks it down differently, but that's the ballpark. Gio was ordered to repay the full amount to affected employees, plus penalties. The penalties were separate from the restitution, and I don't know the exact figure, but Douglas mentioned they were substantial. There was also some issue with record-keeping violations. Gio had been altering time records in the payroll system, which is its own category of offense. I don't know what the total financial hit was when you add up the restitution, the penalties, the legal fees. Gio hired an attorney about 2 months into the investigation. and whatever else comes with a finding like that. But I know it was enough to end things. One detail that stuck with me from the findings: the record-keeping thing. Gio hadn't just been passively under-reporting hours. He had been going into the payroll software and manually editing time punches. Like, an employee would clock out at 11:47 p.m., and Gio would go in and change it to 10 p.m., systematically. For years. That's not an accident. That's not a mistake with the software. That's a guy sitting at a computer, making a choice to steal from people one time, punch at a time. But I know what happened next. Final update. Rosario's closed about 6 weeks after the findings came down. Gio couldn't cover the repayment and keep the doors open at the same time. The staff got notice on a Monday, and the last day of service was that Friday. 5 days. That's how fast it happened. The mood that last week was weird. Some people were angry, at Gio, obviously, but also at the situation. A couple of the newer employees who hadn't been there long enough to be affected by the violations were just losing their jobs, with no restitution coming their way. I felt bad about that. I still do, honestly. I got my share of the restitution about 3 months later. It was a little over $11,000. Not life-changing money, but it covered a semester of tuition and got me out of a hole I didn't even realize I was in. Other employees got varying amounts depending on how long they'd worked there and which violations applied to them. Pete got one of the bigger checks from what I heard. Dana, too. Gio never spoke to me again. Not that I expected him to. Last I heard, he was trying to open something new, a different concept, different location. I have no idea if it happened. I don't really care. Wes transferred to a chain place across town. We still hang out sometimes. He told me once that he wished he'd been the one to file the complaint, and I told him it doesn't matter who filed it. It matters that it got filed. He bought me a soda for that, which honestly felt like more closure than the restitution check. The one thing that bugs me, and this is small but it sticks, is that there was a dishwasher named Hector who worked there for years. Quiet guy, always had his headphones in, never complained about anything. I don't know if he was affected by the violations or if he got any restitution. I asked Dana about him, and she said she thought he moved out of the area. I hope he's all right. I think about him sometimes. As for me, I'm finishing up my last year of undergrad. I switched from pre-law to a double focus in pre-law and labor studies, which probably surprises nobody. I still wait tables at a different place. Smaller, family-owned, yeah, I know, but the owner there actually follows the law. I check. Old habits. Anyway, the whole thing taught me something I don't think I would have learned in a classroom. The law only works if someone uses it. Gio didn't steal $340,000 because the system was broken. He stole it because nobody in that building knew the system existed. Or if they did, they were too tired or too scared or too dependent on the job to do anything about it. I wasn't brave. I was just informed at the right time. And I had a spreadsheet. So yeah, that's my story. I documented my boss stealing from his entire staff for 8 months, filed a federal complaint, and watched a restaurant empire. Okay, one restaurant, but still, collapse under the weight of its own greed. Would you have done the same thing? Would you have kept quiet and just taken the money you were getting? Or would you have walked out on day one? Genuinely curious because I still wonder if I waited too long. Look, I'm not going to stand here and pretend this is some deep life lesson about justice prevailing. What Connor did was smart. Cold-blooded smart. The kind of smart where you don't flip the table. You photograph the table, document who built it, note the day it was delivered, and then hand the building inspector a folder so thick it needs its own briefcase. The house took from everybody for years and thought the game would last forever. It didn't. If you're going through something like this at your job, know your rights. Seriously, Google it tonight. What's the most messed up thing a boss has ever pulled on you? Drop it in the comments. And if you haven't already, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one. What's good, everybody? So today we've got a story that is going to have you checking your own lease agreement before this video is even over. I'm serious. Because this guy found out his roommate had been skimming rent money off the top for 2 full years. 2 years. And the way he handled it? Cold. Calculated. Beautiful. We're talking spreadsheets, receipts, landlord meetings, the whole nine. If you've ever had a roommate who was a little too eager to handle the bills, this one's for you. Smash that subscribe button and let's get into it. The roommate who overcharged rent for 2 years. So, I need to tell somebody about this because my hands are still kind of shaking, and I keep rereading my own text messages, like I'm studying for a final exam. This all happened over the last few weeks, but the setup goes back about 2 years, which is the part that really makes my stomach turn when I think about it. My name's Cole. I'm 28, and I work as an accounts receivable coordinator at a dental equipment company. Yeah, it's exactly as exciting as it sounds. I spend my days chasing down invoices from orthodontist offices and making sure payment terms are met. But here's the thing about that job. It made me good with numbers. Really good. And it made me suspicious of people who are bad with explanations about numbers. That's going to matter in a second. About 2.5 years ago, I was looking for a new place. I'd been living in a studio that was fine, honestly, but it was getting cramped, and the building had this persistent mildew smell that no amount of candles could fix. I'm talking like I had 4 different Bath and Body Works candles going at any given time, and the place still smelled like a wet towel left in a gym bag. So I started looking. I found a listing on one of those roommate finder apps. You know, the ones where people post their spare room, and you just kind of hope they're not weird. The listing was for a 2-bedroom apartment in a decent part of town. Good natural light, in-unit laundry, parking spot included. The guy who posted it, I'll call him Gavin, seemed normal enough. He was maybe 30, 31 at the time, worked at a car dealership doing... Actually, I never really figured out what he did there exactly. Something with inventory, I think. He always described it differently every time someone asked, which I guess should have been a red flag, but I didn't think much of it then. Gavin held the master lease. That was the arrangement from the start. He'd been in the apartment for about a year before I moved in, and the landlord had approved a sublease situation where I'd pay Gavin directly and he'd pay the full rent to the landlord. Pretty standard stuff, or at least I thought it was. He told me my share of rent was $1,150 a month. Total rent for the apartment, he said, was $2,300. So we were splitting it right down the middle, 50-50, fair and square. I asked to see the lease once, early on, and he kind of waved me off. Said something about how his copy was at his parents' house, and he'd grab it next time he was there. I let it go. Looking back, I want to reach through time and shake myself. I had a signed sublease agreement that Gavin had drawn up, not a lawyer, just him, that stated my portion was $1,150. So I figured, okay, whatever, we're good. And honestly, for a while, things were fine. Gavin was an okay roommate. Not great, but okay. He left dishes in the sink sometimes, but nothing crazy. He had this habit of leaving the TV on when he left the apartment, always tuned to those house flipping shows, which I found kind of ironic later. He also had this collection of bobbleheads on a shelf in the living room, like maybe 15 or 20 of them, all baseball players, and he'd get genuinely upset if you touched any of them. I accidentally bumped one once while vacuuming, and he acted like I'd committed a felony. But whatever, quirks are quirks. I could live with bobblehead guy. The first crack in things happened about 8 months in. I got a piece of mail that was clearly meant for Gavin, but had been opened already. I think the mailman just stuffed it in the wrong slot and Gavin had opened it thinking it was something else. It was a notice from the landlord's management company about a rent increase. The letter referenced the current monthly rent of $1,700 and said it would be going up to $1,750 starting the following month. $1,700, not $2,300. I remember standing in the kitchen reading that letter, and my brain just kind of buffered, like a video that won't load. I read it 3 times. Current monthly rent, $1,700. I was paying $1,150 of a $1,700 rent. That meant Gavin was only paying $550. I was covering almost 68% of the rent, while he sat there watching Flip or Flop and rearranging his bobbleheads. But wait, it got worse. Because $1,700 was the OLD rent. Before I moved in, before the sublease, the rent had presumably been even lower. Which meant from day one, Gavin had been overcharging me by $400 a month. $400. Every single month. For what was, at that point, about 8 months. I didn't confront him right away. And here's where my job actually came in handy. When you work in accounts receivable, You learn real quick that you don't go making accusations until you've got documentation that could survive a courtroom. So I took a photo of that letter with my phone. Then I put it back exactly where I found it on the counter. Over the next couple of weeks, I started quietly gathering information. I looked up the apartment on every rental listing site I could find. I found a cached version of the original listing from before Gavin even moved in. Rent was listed at $1,600 at that time. I pulled my bank statements showing every single payment I'd made to Gavin. Venmo transactions, every one time-stamped and annotated because, thank God, I'm the kind of person who puts notes on Venmo payments. Every single one said rent or April rent or whatever the month was. I also started paying closer attention to Gavin's behavior. And once you're looking for it, the signs were everywhere. He bought a new 65-inch TV about 4 months after I moved in. Got a pretty expensive mountain bike that he rode maybe twice, before it became a very costly coat rack in his bedroom. He was always ordering takeout from nice places. Not like normal takeout, but like $45 entree kind of places. And he drove a car that was definitely nicer than what someone working at a dealership in an unclear role should have been driving. Not to judge, but you know what I mean. The math wasn't mathing, as they say. I kept paying rent on time every month. I know that sounds crazy, but I didn't want to tip him off. I wanted to build an airtight case first. So for the next, and this is the part where I kind of cringe at my own patience, year and 4 months, I kept paying $1,150 while documenting everything. During that time, the rent went up again to $1,800 after the increase to $1,750. I know because I accidentally checked the mail before Gavin one day and found another notice. So even with rent at $1,800, I was still paying $1,150, while the fair split would have been $900. The overpayment had gone from $400 to essentially $350. But that first year plus at $400 over meant the total was stacking up fast. I made a spreadsheet. Of course I did. I'm an accounts receivable guy. Spreadsheets are basically my love language. I tracked every month what I paid, what the actual rent was, what a fair 50-50 split would have been, and the running total of how much I'd overpaid. Column headers, conditional formatting, the works. I even color-coded it. The overpayment column was in red, because I have a flair for the dramatic apparently. By the time I decided to act, I'd been living there for just over 2 years. The total overpayment came to $9,600. $9,600. That's a used car. That's a really solid vacation. I don't know, it's a lot of bobbleheads. Here's what I did. First, I called the landlord's management company directly. I explained that I was the subtenant in unit whatever, and that I wanted to verify some information about the lease. The woman I spoke with, her name was Diane, was actually super helpful. She confirmed the rent amounts for every period I asked about. She also confirmed that the master lease, Gavin's lease, specifically stated that any sublease arrangement had to charge the subtenant a proportional share of rent, not to exceed 50%. It was right there in the lease language. Gavin wasn't just overcharging me. He was violating his own lease terms. Diane said she'd flag it for the property manager. I asked her if she could hold off on contacting Gavin directly for about a week. She said she'd check with her boss. She called me back the next day and said they were fine giving me a week because, her words, this is not the first time we've dealt with something like this with this tenant. She didn't elaborate and I didn't ask, but wow. Apparently Gavin had a reputation. Side note, Diane, if you're somehow reading this, you are a national treasure and I hope you get a raise. I spent that week preparing. I organized all my documentation into a folder, physical copies, because I wanted the weight of paper in my hands when I did this. The spreadsheet, printed and highlighted. The Venmo records, every page. The photos of the rent notices. The sublease agreement Gavin had written up. The actual lease terms from the management company that Diane had emailed me. Then I invited Gavin to sit down for what I called a lease chat. He seemed confused but not alarmed. I think he assumed I was going to ask about renewing for another year or something. He actually seemed kind of cheerful about it, which was almost worse. But here's the thing he didn't know. I'd also invited the property manager, a guy named Walt. Walt was going to show up about 10 minutes into our conversation. That was the plan. We sat down at the kitchen table on a Wednesday evening. Gavin had an energy drink and was leaning back in his chair all casual. I had my folder. I started simple. Hey Gavin, I just want to go over some rent stuff. Can you walk me through how you calculate my share? He gave me the same line he'd given me 2 years ago. Total rent is $2,300. We split it 50-50, but he rounds down for me to $1,150 because he's a good guy like that. He actually said that. A good guy like that. I had to physically stop myself from laughing. Okay, I said. So just to be clear, you're saying the total rent for this apartment is $2,300 per month? Yeah, man, that's what it's always been. Well, it went up a little bit, but I've been eating the increase so you don't have to worry about it. He took a sip of his energy drink like he'd just said something generous. That's when I opened the folder. I slid the first document across the table. The rent notice from the management company showing $1,700. He looked at it. His face did this thing. Like his expression couldn't decide between confused and scared, so it just went blank. He started. That's the actual rent, I said. From 18 months ago. Here's the next one. I slid over the $1,750 notice. Then the $1,800 one. Cole, listen. I'm not done. I pulled out the spreadsheet. I'm not going to lie. There was a part of me that was enjoying this, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. But in the moment, it felt earned. I walked him through every month, every payment, every discrepancy. The running total in red at the bottom, $9,600. His face was white, not like pale, white, like printer paper. This has to be a misunderstanding, he said. I think the landlord has different rates or something. Maybe there's fees I'm covering that you don't... That's when there was a knock at the door. Walt, the property manager, right on time. I got up and let him in. Gavin looked like he'd seen a ghost. Actually, he looked like he'd seen a ghost that was also holding a spreadsheet. Walt sat down. He was very professional about it. Calm, direct, not mean. He confirmed the rent amounts. He confirmed the lease terms about proportional sublease charges. He told Gavin very plainly that he'd been in violation of his lease for the entire duration of my tenancy. Gavin tried a few different angles. He said he didn't understand the lease language. He said he thought he was allowed to charge whatever the market rate was for the room. He said he had extra expenses related to the apartment that justified the higher charge. Walt asked him to specify those expenses. Gavin couldn't name a single one. Then Gavin tried the sympathy play. He said he'd been struggling financially and needed the extra money. Which, I mean, come on, man. You bought a 65-inch TV and a mountain bike with my money. Your struggle was funded by my wallet. Walt laid out the options. Option 1. Gavin could voluntarily terminate his lease, I could sign a new lease directly with the management company, and Gavin would have 30 days to vacate. Option 2. The management company would begin formal eviction proceedings for lease violations, which would go on Gavin's record and make it harder for him to rent in the future. Gavin looked at me like I'd betrayed him. Like I was the one who'd done something wrong. Dude, we were friends, he said. Dude, you stole $9,000 from me, I said. Which, okay, it's not technically stealing in the legal sense maybe, but it felt pretty stealing adjacent. He picked option 1. Signed the voluntary termination paperwork that Walt had brought. I signed a new lease application that same night. The management company approved me within 48 hours. Diane called to tell me personally, and she sounded genuinely happy about it. Over the next few weeks, Gavin packed up his stuff. It was awkward, obviously. He barely spoke to me. He did try once more to explain himself, said something about how he didn't think it was that big a deal, and that everyone marks up rent a little. I just stared at him. $400 a month is not a little. That's a car payment. That's groceries for a family. That's 800 gumballs from one of those machines at the grocery store. I don't know why that was my comparison, but I stand by it. The bobblehead collection was the last thing he packed. Wrapped each one individually in newspaper like they were made of crystal. Took him almost an hour just for the bobbleheads. I watched from the couch, and honestly, it was the most surreal part of this whole experience. He moved out on a Saturday, didn't say goodbye, just loaded up his car and drove off. I saw the mountain bike strapped to the back of his car, still looking brand new, and I just shook my head. As for the money, the $9,600, I talked to a few people about whether I had a legal case to get it back. The consensus was that I probably did, but it would cost me time and money to pursue it, and the amount is in that annoying zone where it's too much to ignore, but potentially not enough to justify the hassle of litigation. I filed a claim in small claims court anyway, because at this point it was the principal. I haven't had my hearing yet, so I can't tell you how that part ends. But what I can tell you is this. I now have a 2-bedroom apartment to myself, at a rent of $1,800 a month, which is actually less than I was paying Gavin for 1 bedroom in the same apartment. Let that sink in. I'm paying less for the whole place than I was paying for half of it. I turned Gavin's old room into a home office, took down the bobblehead shelf, patched the holes, put up a whiteboard where I track my actual finances now, budget, savings goals, the works. My mom says it's a lot, but I think she's just not used to seeing a whiteboard in a residential setting. I also changed the Wi-Fi password. It used to be Gavin Rules 2024, which tells you everything you need to know about the guy, honestly. Oh no. If you're watching this and your roommate handles all the rent payments and won't show you the lease, pause this video right now and go find out what you're actually paying for. Drop a comment if you just had a cold sweat moment, because this is way more common than any of us want to admit. Cole sitting on that information for over a year while building his case? That's not patience. That's the energy of a man who reconciles invoices for a living. He treated this like a delinquent account. Gavin was basically a past-due orthodontist who owed money on a dental chair. And here's the part I didn't even get to in the main post because it was already getting long. I need to tell you guys about what happened after Gavin moved out, because the aftermath was somehow even more revealing than the confrontation itself. After he left, I did a deep clean of the apartment. Like a real deep clean. Moved furniture, scrubbed baseboards, the whole thing. And when I moved the couch, I found stuff under there that painted a very clear picture of how Gavin had been living on my dime. 3 receipts from a place called Coastal Grill, which is this upscale seafood restaurant about 20 minutes from the apartment. The cheapest receipt was $87 for one person. I know it was for one person because the ticket said one guest at the top. This man was eating lobster tails on my overcharged rent money. I also found a credit card statement that had apparently slipped behind the couch cushions at some point. I know I probably shouldn't have looked at it, but I absolutely looked at it. And listen, I'm not going to go line by line because that's not my business. But I will say that there were multiple charges to a place called Velocity Kart, which I looked up and it's one of those indoor go-kart racing places. Multiple charges. Like this man was go-kart racing on a regular basis. With my money. I paid for Gavin's go-kart hobby. That's going to haunt me. Anyway, in the weeks after Gavin moved out, I heard from a couple of mutual acquaintances. People we'd both known through the apartment complex's little community events. Apparently, Gavin had been telling people that I screwed him over and got him kicked out of his own apartment. Which, and I cannot stress this enough, is the most audacious reframing of events I have ever encountered. The man was pocketing $400 of my money every month, and I'm the bad guy? That's like a pickpocket getting mad at you for having shallow pockets. One of our neighbors, a retired woman named Phyllis, who lives 2 doors down and grows tomatoes on her balcony, actually came up to me in the hallway and said, "I heard what happened. Good for you." Phyllis doesn't say much, but when she speaks, it carries weight. I felt validated by Phyllis. I think we all need a Phyllis in our lives. The small claims court situation is still pending, like I said. But I did get a letter from Gavin's, I guess his family? His mom, actually. She wrote me a letter, a physical letter, saying that what I did was cruel, and that Gavin was going through a hard time. "Ma'am, your son stole almost $10,000 from me so he could eat lobster and race go-karts." I think we have different definitions of hardship. I didn't respond to the letter. I wanted to, believe me, but sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just not let the silence do the talking. My parents, for what it's worth, were furious when I told them the full story. My dad kept saying $9,000 over and over like he was trying to make it make sense. My mom immediately asked if I'd checked whether Gavin had done this to anyone else before me. And you know what? Diane's comment about this not being the first time suggests that maybe he had. I kind of want to track down whoever lived there before me and compare notes, but that might be going too far. Or maybe it's not going far enough. I honestly don't know. The apartment itself is great now, by the way. Having both bedrooms to myself is incredible. The home office situation is working out perfectly for when I need to do overtime remotely, which happens a lot during end of quarter, when all the dental offices are trying to close out their books, and I'm chasing down payment for like 40 autoclave machines at once. Nobody asked about my job, but I'm telling you anyway, because I think people underestimate how chaotic dental equipment billing can be. There's a whole world of drama in sterilization equipment invoicing that nobody talks about. I adopted a cat too. Her name is Spreadsheet. Yes, I named my cat Spreadsheet. My friends think it's ridiculous, but she responds to it, so I think we're past the point of discussion. She sleeps in the room that used to be Gavin's, which feels poetic in a way I can't fully articulate. Where once there were bobbleheads, there is now a cat bed, and one of those little window perch things so she can watch birds. Real quick, raise your hand if you also want Phyllis, the tomato-growing neighbor, to narrate your life decisions. Because same. And can we talk about the fact that Gavin named the Wi-Fi password after himself? Gavin Rules 2024. That's not a Wi-Fi password. That's a vanity license plate for someone with zero self-awareness. Meanwhile, Cole's over here naming his cat Spreadsheet, which honestly goes harder than any pet name I've heard this year. This man turned his roommate's betrayal into a whole home office renovation arc. HGTV could never. I want to give some practical advice here because I've gotten a bunch of DMs and comments asking what people should do if they think they're in a similar situation. So here's what I'd recommend based on what I went through. First, get a copy of the actual lease. Not the sublease your roommate typed up on Google Docs at 11 p.m. The real lease. The one between the landlord and the master tenant. You have a right to know what the total rent is. If your roommate refuses to show it to you, that is a red flag the size of a billboard. I don't care how good of friends you are. I don't care if you've known them since kindergarten. If they won't show you the lease, something is wrong. Second, contact the landlord or property management company directly. You don't have to make it confrontational. You can literally just call and say, "Hi, I'm the subtenant in Unit X. I just want to verify some lease information." That's what I did, and Diane was incredibly helpful. Most management companies keep detailed records, and they're usually willing to share basic information with tenants and subtenants. If they won't, that's also a red flag, but a different kind. Third, document everything. Everything. I know I sound like a broken record, but I can't stress this enough. Save every payment receipt. Save every Venmo transaction. Screenshot every text about rent. If your roommate tells you the rent amount verbally, follow up with a text like, "Just to confirm, my share is X dollars, right?" So you have it in writing. Create a paper trail so thick you could use it as a doorstop. Fourth, don't confront until you're ready. This was the hardest part for me. I sat on this information for over a year. That might sound extreme, and honestly it probably was. I probably could have acted sooner. But I wanted to be absolutely certain of my facts, and I wanted to have the landlord on my side before I made my move. If I'd confronted Gavin early, without evidence, he could have denied it, or destroyed documents, or made up some excuse. Instead, I walked into that conversation with a folder thicker than a phone book and a property manager at the door. There was nowhere for him to go. Fifth, and this is one people don't think about. Check if your roommate has done this before. Talk to previous tenants if you can find them. Check reviews of the listing if it was posted online. Look for patterns. Gavin's management company implied this wasn't new behavior for him. If I'd known that going in, I might have caught it sooner. I also want to say something about the emotional side of this, because it wasn't just about money. I trusted Gavin. Maybe we weren't best friends, but I trusted him to be honest about something as basic as how much rent costs. Finding out he'd been lying to my face every month for 2 years, that messes with you. It makes you question other things. Like, was the cable bill actually what he said it was? Were the utilities split fairly? I went back and checked those too, by the way. The utilities were actually split correctly, weirdly enough. I guess even scammers have their limits. There's this weird grief that comes with realizing someone took advantage of you. It's not the same as losing a loved one or anything like that. I don't want to be dramatic, but there's a real sense of loss. Loss of trust, mainly. I'm more guarded now about shared living situations. If I ever have a roommate again, which given that I now have a 2-bedroom apartment and a cat named Spreadsheet seems unlikely, I will be reading every single line of every single document before I sign anything. I will verify every number independently. I will be the most informed subtenant in the history of subletting. You know what gets me about this story? Gavin had such a sweet deal going. $400 a month in pure profit, a roommate who paid on time every month, no questions asked, and he still couldn't keep it quiet. The receipts under the couch, the go-kart charges, the mountain bike he rode twice. He was living like he won a small lottery and couldn't resist spending the winnings in the most obvious way possible. It's like robbing a bank and then immediately buying a gold-plated mailbox. Some people just cannot be subtle about their ill-gotten gains, and it's honestly beautiful to watch them implode. Final update. Alright, so a lot has happened since I last posted, and I wanted to give everyone the full update because you've all been incredibly supportive, and also because some of you have been messaging me daily asking for news, which is flattering and also slightly terrifying. The small claims court hearing happened. It took forever to get scheduled. The court system moves at the speed of a DMV staffed entirely by sloths. But we finally got our day. And by our, I mean me and Gavin. Because yes, he showed up. He showed up wearing a blazer, which felt like a choice. I wore a normal button-down because I'm not trying to cosplay as a person who goes to court regularly. I presented my case. The spreadsheet, the payment records, the lease terms, the communications with the management company. All of it, organized in a binder with tabs. I know, I'm a lot. But the judge seemed to appreciate the organization. Gavin's defense was, and I am paraphrasing only slightly here, I didn't know I couldn't do that. He argued that he thought the sublease arrangement allowed him to set whatever price he wanted for the room. He said he considered the extra $400 to be a management fee for being the primary leaseholder. He used the phrase management fee 3 separate times, and each time the judge's expression got a little more skeptical. The judge asked Gavin if he'd disclose this management fee to me at any point. Gavin said no. The judge asked if the sublease agreement mentioned any management fee. It did not. The judge asked if the original lease authorized any markup on sublease charges. It explicitly did not. In fact, it said the opposite. I won. The judge awarded me $8,200, which was the full amount minus a small deduction that honestly I didn't fully understand the reasoning behind. Something about a partial offset for Gavin's role in maintaining the lease relationship. Whatever, I'll take $8,200 happily. That's still a used car. That's still a very solid vacation. That's, I did the math, approximately 16,400 gumballs. Gavin has 90 days to pay. If he doesn't, I can pursue wage garnishment, which is both a satisfying legal option and a great name for a band. After the hearing, Gavin caught me in the parking lot. For a second, I thought it might get confrontational, but it didn't. He just looked tired. He said, I know I messed up. And then he said, for what it's worth, you were a good roommate. Which is the most backhanded compliment I've ever received, because yeah, I was a great roommate. I was literally paying 68% of your rent. Of course I was a good roommate. That's the best deal you're ever going to get in your life, and you blew it because you couldn't resist go-karting on someone else's dime. I just said, take care, Gavin, and walked to my car. I didn't feel victorious or anything. Mostly, I just felt tired and kind of sad. 2 years of living with someone, and it ends in a courthouse parking lot with a weird semi-apology. Life is strange, man. But here's the silver lining stuff, because I promised myself I'd end this on a positive note. The apartment is wonderful. I've made it fully mine now. The home office has a standing desk that I bought with the money I'm saving on rent. I got a really good coffee maker. One of those pour-over setups with a gooseneck kettle. I make my coffee every morning and sit at the kitchen table where I once confronted a man with a color-coded spreadsheet. And I drink that coffee, and I look at spreadsheet, the cat, not the document, sleeping in a sunbeam, and I think, this is better. Phyllis brought me tomatoes last week. Just showed up at my door with a bag of cherry tomatoes from her balcony garden and said, these are for the boy who stood up for himself. I almost cried. I put the tomatoes in a salad, and it was the best salad I've ever had, probably because it was seasoned with vindication and neighborly respect. My finances are in the best shape they've ever been. Without the $400 monthly overpayment and with the new lease at $1,800 for the whole apartment, I'm actually saving real money for the first time since college. I started putting money into a high-yield savings account. I'm looking at maybe taking a trip somewhere warm this winter. Nothing crazy. I'm still an accounts receivable coordinator, not a hedge fund manager. But maybe a long weekend somewhere with a beach and no bobbleheads. I've also become something of an unofficial advisor in my friend group for anyone dealing with roommate issues. 3 different friends have asked me to review their lease agreements since this whole thing went down. I found a discrepancy in one of them. Not as bad as mine, just a $50 difference in how utilities were being split. But still, knowledge is power. Spreadsheets are power. Both kinds of spreadsheet. Oh, and one more thing. Remember how Diane from the management company said this wasn't the first time they dealt with something like this with Gavin? Well, I ended up meeting the previous tenant at a neighborhood block party of all places. Her name was Monica, and she'd only lived there for about 6 months before she moved out. She said she left because something felt off about the rent situation, but she could never prove it because she didn't have access to the lease information. She said she'd been paying $1,100 a month when the actual rent at that time was $1,600. So Gavin was skimming $300 a month off her too. She was so upset when I told her the full story. She's considering filing her own small claims case now, and I told her I'd share my documentation template with her. So yeah, that's the story. The roommate who overcharged rent for 2 years, and the accounts receivable coordinator who caught him with a spreadsheet and a property manager named Walt. Sometimes the boring job skills are the ones that save you. The fact that he found Monica at a block party and she'd been getting scammed too, that's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. Gavin was running a whole rent markup franchise out of that 2-bedroom apartment like it was a side hustle. And the judge awarding $8,200 while Gavin stood there in a blazer talking about his management fee. Bro, you are not a property manager. You are a man with bobbleheads and a go-kart addiction. Cole walked into that courtroom with a tabbed binder and walked out with justice. This is what happens when you try to scam an accountant. You simply do not out-spreadsheet the spreadsheet guy. What a ride. Cole went from overpaying rent for 2 years to having the whole apartment to himself, a cat named Spreadsheet, and a check for $8,200 on the way. And somewhere out there, Gavin is explaining to his next landlord why his rental history has a giant asterisk on it. So here's my question for you guys. Have you ever found out a roommate or someone you trusted was secretly overcharging you or skimming money? And what did you do about it? Drop your stories in the comments. I want to hear the wildest ones. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you in the next one. What you're about to hear is the story of a guy who bought his first house, moved into a quiet neighborhood, and immediately started getting targeted by someone he couldn't identify. Car scratches showing up overnight, packages vanishing from the porch, dog waste mysteriously appearing on his lawn even though he doesn't own a dog. For 4 months, Jake had no idea who was doing it or why. Then he asked his neighbor across the street to pull up the Ring camera footage. And what that camera caught between 2 and 4 a.m. is the reason this story went nuclear. Buckle up because the highlight reel alone is worth the price of admission. My new neighbor was secretly vandalizing my property at 2 a.m. for months. My other neighbor's Ring camera caught everything. I built a highlight reel and filed charges. I closed on my first house in late August. Nothing crazy, just a 3-bedroom ranch on a cul-de-sac in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. The kind of neighborhood where people wave at you when they're getting their mail, and everyone's got one of those little garden flags by the front door. I'd been renting apartments since college. 6 years in a 2-bedroom with a window AC unit that sounded like a helicopter taking off every time it kicked on. And honestly, the whole homeowner thing felt surreal for the first few weeks. I remember standing in my empty living room eating cold pizza off a paper plate, thinking this is actually mine. Just that. Stood there like an idiot for a solid 10 minutes. The pizza was from that place on High Street, the one with the garlic knots that are weirdly good. Not relevant. I just remember the whole moment really clearly. Anyway, the move went smooth. Movers showed up on a Saturday, got everything inside by mid-afternoon. One of the movers dropped a box labeled "Kitchen Fragile" down the front steps, and I heard something shatter inside. Turned out to be a set of mugs my mom had given me when I graduated. I was annoyed for about 5 seconds, and then figured it was a sign I needed new mugs anyway. I spent that Sunday unpacking the kitchen because I figured that was the room I'd need first. My buddy Cole came over and helped me mount the TV. We ordered way too much Chinese food, like an absurd amount, enough for 5 people, and watched college football on the floor because I hadn't set up the couch yet. Good day. The neighborhood seemed great at first. The couple across the street, Don and Liz, came over with a plate of brownies my first week. Homemade, still warm. Don was retired, early 60s, seemed like a genuinely nice guy. Former school principal. Had this easy way of talking to people where you felt like you'd known him for years, even though you just met. Liz told me which days were trash pickup and recycling and gave me the whole rundown on the HOA, which was basically non-existent. They collect $150 a year, and all it really covers is the little sign at the entrance to the neighborhood and the common area landscaping. She also told me about the block party they do every 4th of July, and how the guy at the end of the street does a fireworks show in his backyard. That's technically illegal, but nobody cares. They were the kind of neighbors you actually want. My next-door neighbor to the left was a woman named Rita, probably mid-50s, kept to herself but always had a polite nod when we crossed paths. She had a perfect lawn and these rose bushes along her front walk that looked like they belonged in a magazine. No complaints there. And then there was the neighbor to my right. This guy. I'll call him what my buddy Cole started calling him later on. The night shift. His real name doesn't matter, and honestly, I don't even want to type it. He was maybe late 40s, lived alone, drove a dark blue pickup that was always backed into the driveway, like he needed to make a fast getaway at any moment. His yard was fine, not as manicured as Rita's, but he mowed it and kept things in order. House was a similar ranch style to mine, maybe a little older. He had one of those satellite dishes on the roof that nobody uses anymore. When I moved in, he was standing in his driveway just watching. Not casually either. Arms crossed, feet planted, head tracking the movers like he was counting inventory. Didn't wave, didn't come over, didn't say a single word. One of the movers actually looked at me and kind of gestured toward him like, "What's that guy's deal?" I waved at him. He turned around and went inside. I didn't think much of it, honestly. Some people are private and some people are just awkward. Whatever. I figured I'd win him over eventually, or at the very least we'd have the kind of neighbor relationship where you nod at each other once a month, and that's fine. The first incident happened about 2 weeks after I moved in. September 9th. I know the exact date because I took a photo that morning, and it's time-stamped. I walked out to my car on a Monday morning heading to work. I'm an insurance claims adjuster, so I drive to different sites most days, inspecting damage on homes, vehicles, commercial properties, that kind of thing. And there was a long, deep scratch running along the entire passenger side of my car, from the front fender all the way to the rear bumper. Like someone took a key or a nail and just dragged it the full length in one steady motion. My car was a 2021 Civic. Nothing fancy, but I'd kept it in really good shape. Waxed it twice a year, always parked it away from other cars in parking lots. The scratch was deep enough that you could feel it with your fingernail. Through the clear coat, through the paint, down to the primer in some spots. I was ticked off, but I honestly assumed it was random. Maybe a kid, maybe someone walking by who had a problem with the world. I parked on the street because my garage was still full of boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. Could have been anyone. I got a quote to fix it, $1,400. I put it off because between the down payment, the closing costs, and the 40 other things a new house needs, I had a million expenses already. 2 weeks later, it happened again. September 23rd. Different side this time. 2 parallel scratches on the driver's side. Same depth, same deliberate straight line pattern. Not random scratching. These were controlled even, and went the full length of the car. Another $800 estimate. The body shop guy looked at both sides and said, "Someone doesn't like you, man." That's when I started to wonder, but I still didn't have a suspect. Then the packages started disappearing. I ordered a new doorbell camera. Ironic, I know, I'll get to that. It was supposed to arrive on a Wednesday. Tracking said delivered. No package on the porch. I ordered a replacement set of drill bits from Amazon the next week. Delivered, according to the tracking, gone. A pair of work boots I needed for site visits. Delivered. Gone. I filed reports with the carrier each time, but nothing came of it. Over the next couple months, I lost probably 6 or 7 packages total. The value wasn't huge on most of them, maybe $600 altogether, but it was the principle and the pattern. This wasn't random porch pirating. Someone was specifically watching for my deliveries. Then came the dog waste. I don't own a dog, never have. But starting in maybe mid-October, I'd wake up and find dog waste on my front lawn. Not like an animal wandered through and did its business. This was placed, deliberately, right in the middle of the lawn where you couldn't miss it. sometimes near the walkway where you'd step in it if you weren't paying attention. It happened probably 8 or 9 times over a 6-week period. I started getting paranoid. I'd lie in bed at night and hear a noise outside, a car door, a branch, anything, and I'd be at the window in 2 seconds. I never saw anything, though. My front porch light didn't illuminate much past the steps, and I still hadn't gotten around to installing the replacement doorbell camera. The first one got stolen, remember, which is almost funny in hindsight. I bought a cheap motion-activated floodlight and put it above my garage door. $80. It helped a little, but whoever was doing this seemed to know exactly where the light reached, and they stayed just outside of it. I even started parking my car in different spots on the street, thinking maybe it was a proximity thing. Didn't help. I talked to a couple of my coworkers about it. One of them, a guy named Bryce who handles auto claims, said I should set up a trail cam like you'd use for deer hunting. I looked into it, but the cheap ones have terrible night vision, and the good ones were like $300 that I didn't want to spend on top of everything else. I mean, I was already hemorrhaging money from the scratches and the stolen packages. By December, I was genuinely stressed. The car had been scratched 4 times total at that point. 2 on the passenger side, 2 on the driver's side. All the same pattern. Long, deliberate, consistent depth. Repair estimates combined were pushing $3,800. I'd had at least 7 packages go missing. And the lawn thing was just gross and weird, and felt personal in a way that's hard to describe. I started wondering if I'd somehow offended someone without knowing it. I went over every single interaction I'd had since moving in. I replayed conversations in my head. I couldn't think of a single thing I'd done wrong. I even knocked on the night shift's door one evening to ask if he'd seen anything suspicious in the neighborhood. He opened the door about 6 inches, told me he hadn't seen anything, and closed it before I could even finish asking. The whole conversation lasted maybe 4 seconds. I stood on his porch for a moment after the door shut, feeling like an idiot. That was the last time I tried to talk to him. Here's where I need to back up and explain something about how I think. I've been an insurance claims adjuster for 8 years. My entire job is looking at a situation and figuring out what actually happened based on evidence. Witness statements, photos, timelines, damage patterns. I do this every single day. And the damage to my car, the consistent depth, the straight lines, the fact that it always happened overnight. That wasn't random vandalism. That was someone who knew exactly where my car was parked and had time to do it carefully. Someone close. Hold on. For those listening, this is me, not the OP. I need to jump in here because this is giving me strong Scooby-Doo energy. You know how the villain is always someone who was standing right there the whole time? Some dude in a rubber mask who could have been caught in episode 1 if anyone had just looked to their left? That's this guy. The night shift is literally standing in his driveway, with his arms crossed, watching Jake move in like a cartoon villain, monologuing in his head. All that was missing was a swivel chair and a white cat. And Jake, bless his heart, went and knocked on the dude's door to ask if he'd seen anything. My brother. You asked the wolf if he'd seen any sheep go missing. I can't. In January, I finally had a real conversation with Don from across the street. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was grabbing my mail. From my new locking mailbox, by the way. Because yeah, I'd already upgraded that after a piece of mail I was expecting never showed up. Don was doing something in his front garden bed, and he saw me and walked over. We talked for a while. Normal stuff at first, how the winter was going, whether the HOA had responded to some pothole complaint, that kind of thing. Then he asked about the scratches on my car, because he'd noticed them from across the street. I hadn't really talked to anyone in the neighborhood about everything that was going on, so it all kind of came out at once. I told him about the car, the packages, the dog stuff, the dead grass, everything. I probably talked for 10 straight minutes. He just listened with his arms folded, nodding. Then he got quiet for a second, looked at my house, looked at the night shift's house, and then said something that changed everything. Jake, I've got a Ring camera on my front door. It's been there for 2 years. It points straight across the street at your house and your neighbor's driveway. I've got months of footage saved to the cloud. I swear my heart skipped. I asked if he'd be willing to let me look through it. He said absolutely, said he and Liz had actually talked about the scratches on my car a few weeks ago, and were wondering what was going on. Liz had apparently said she wanted to bring it up, but didn't want to be nosy. Don told me to come over after dinner that evening, and we'd go through it together. That night I walked across the street at about 7:30. Liz let me in, and Don already had his laptop set up at the kitchen table, with 2 chairs pulled up. Liz made coffee. The three of us sat down, and Don pulled up the Ring app. His camera had a clear wide-angle view of my front yard, my driveway, the strip of street where I parked my car, and, this is the important part, it also caught about half of the night shift's driveway and his side yard. Don's Ring was set to record on motion detection with a pretty wide sensitivity range. So we had a ton of clips. Most of them were cars driving by, deer wandering through at night, Don's cat setting off the sensor. But we started filtering for clips between midnight and 5 a.m., specifically ones where there was motion near my property. The first clip we found was from September 14th, at 2:47 a.m., and I will never forget watching it for the first time. The night shift walked out of his side door, the one that faces my house, wearing what looked like sweatpants and a dark shirt. He crossed the strip of grass between our properties, maybe 15 feet, and approached my car on the passenger side. He was carrying something in his right hand. It was hard to tell exactly what from the camera angle, but it was small, thin, and pointed. He put his arm out and walked the full length of my car slowly, deliberate. Then he turned around, walked back across the grass, went inside, and shut the door. The whole thing took about 90 seconds. 90 seconds to do $1,400 in damage. I just sat there staring at the screen. My hands were shaking a little. Not from anger, well, partly anger, but mostly from the realization that I'd been right. Someone was targeting me, and it was the guy 10 feet from my bedroom window. Don looked at me and said, "Keep going, there's more." The next clip was from September 28th, same exact pattern. Side door, 3:12 a.m., crossed to my car, walked the length of it with his arm extended against the driver's side this time, went back inside, like clockwork, like this was just part of his routine. Wake up, set an alarm or whatever, walk outside in the dark, scratch the neighbor's car, go back to sleep. We found 11 clips total spanning from September through the end of December. 4 of them showed him scratching my car on different dates, all between 2 and 4 a.m. Each time the same methodical walk alongside the vehicle with his arm extended. 3 clips showed him walking up to my front porch, picking up a package, and carrying it back to his house. On one of these, he actually paused under the streetlight long enough that you could see the Amazon logo on the box he was holding. And 4 clips, this is the part that still gets me, showed him walking onto my lawn with a plastic bag, crouching down, placing something on the grass, and walking back. He was depositing the dog waste by hand, from a plastic bag, which means he was collecting it from somewhere, storing it, and then placing it on my property at 3 a.m. like some kind of deranged lawn gnome. Don and I sat there for probably 2 hours going through everything. His wife Liz came in at one point and just stood behind us shaking her head. She said she'd always thought something was off about that guy, but figured he was just antisocial. I asked Don if he'd let me compile the footage. He said go for it. Okay, stop! Let me break down what's actually going on in this man's brain, because it's genuinely fascinating in a nature documentary about the world's dumbest predator kind of way. The night shift doesn't have a reason to hate Jake. Jake moved in, waved at the guy, minded his own business. But the night shift decided he was going to launch a one-man covert ops campaign against this random dude's property at 3 a.m. using a bag of dog poop as one of his primary weapons. This isn't a grudge. This is a full-time hobby. He set alarms for this. He prepped materials. He had a routine. And the whole time he thought he was invisible because nobody had a camera pointed his direction. Except somebody did. And it recorded everything. In HD. Over the next week, I did what I do best. I built a case. I went through every clip Don gave me access to. I screenshot the clearest frames from each incident. I put together a timeline. Date, time, type of incident, clip reference number. I cross-referenced the footage dates with my own records. The dates of the car scratches matched up exactly with the clips showing him approaching the vehicle. The dates of missing packages lined up with clips of him taking boxes off my porch. Everything matched. I also started documenting the cumulative damage. 4 sets of car scratches. Repair estimates totaling $3,800. 7 confirmed stolen packages. Replacement value around $600. The motion-activated floodlight I bought because of him. $120. The doorbell camera he stole, that was one of the packages. $180. Cost to have my lawn treated after repeated contamination. $200. Time and stress and lost sleep, honestly priceless. But I didn't include that. Total documented damage, $6,900. But I wasn't done. I wanted to know if there was anything else. I asked Don if I could go through the footage more carefully on my own. He gave me his Ring login so I could access the cloud storage directly. Over the next few days, I went through every single motion-triggered clip from August through January. Everyone. And I found more. There were clips of the night shift, standing at the edge of his property line at odd hours, just staring at my house. Not doing anything specific, just standing there. There were 2 clips where he appeared to tamper with my mailbox, opening it, looking inside, closing it. I couldn't prove he took mail, but the fact that he was accessing my mailbox at 2:30 a.m. is a federal offense on its own. I also found 3 clips of him doing something to my garden hose, which explained why it had a leak I couldn't figure out. And 1 clip, this one made me furious, showed him pouring something along the edge of my lawn near the property line. I'd noticed that strip of grass had turned brown and died, and I couldn't figure out why. He was killing my grass. On purpose. Revised damage total with the additional incidents, $11,400. That included the lawn damage, mailbox tampering. I had to get a locking mailbox, $80, the garden hose replacement, and additional property damage I could now attribute to him based on the footage and timeline. I made a highlight reel. No joke. I compiled the clearest, most damning clips into one video, organized chronologically, with dates and timestamps visible. I also created a written incident log that looked exactly like the kind of documentation I put together for insurance claims at work. Because that's literally what this was. A claim. Just not one I'd ever process through my office. Wait! Hold the phone. Jake said he made a highlight reel. A highlight reel. This man put together a greatest hits compilation of his neighbor's 3 a.m. crime spree like he was editing a montage for the NFL draft. I'm picturing dramatic music, slow motion replays, maybe a freeze frame with a red circle around the Amazon box. And the incident log, formatted like an actual insurance claim. What's next? The night shift getting a claims denial letter in his mailbox. Dear Sir, upon review, your nightly vandalism has been denied coverage due to you being a complete psychopath. Please reference claim number O-G-O-A-W-A-Y. This is the most insurance adjuster revenge I've ever heard of, and I am absolutely here for it. I took everything to the police. I walked into the station on a Tuesday morning with a USB drive containing the compiled footage, a printed copy of my incident log, printed screenshots of the clearest frames, and the damage estimates from the body shop. The officer at the front desk looked at the stack of papers I put down and said, "This is thorough." Yeah, I hear that a lot at work. They assigned a detective to the case, a woman named Detective Hale who looked like she'd seen everything twice. I sat with her for about an hour and a half, going through the footage clip by clip and walking through my timeline. She took notes on a legal pad. She was shaking her head by the 3rd clip. By the time we got to the dog waste placement clips, specifically the one where you can see him crouching on my lawn at 3:15 a.m. with a plastic bag, she actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how genuinely bizarre it was. She said she'd been doing this job for 15 years, had dealt with neighbor disputes of every kind imaginable, and had never once seen someone go to this much effort to be this petty over this long of a period. She asked if I had any idea why he was targeting me. I told her I'd never had a single real conversation with the man. I'd waved at him on moving day. I'd knocked on his door once to ask about suspicious activity in the neighborhood. That was literally it. The full extent of our relationship was 1 wave and 4 seconds of him telling me he hadn't seen anything through a 6-inch crack in his door. She said sometimes neighbors develop fixations on new residents for no rational reason. Sometimes it's a territorial thing. Sometimes it's something going on in their own life that they take out on the nearest target. Sometimes they're just miserable people who want everyone around them to be miserable too. She said the methodical nature of it, the timing, the consistency, the fact that he did it over months without escalating to anything violent, was actually pretty textbook for a certain type of personality. The detective told me that based on the footage they had enough to move forward with criminal charges. The car scratching alone was criminal mischief. The package theft was straight-up larceny. The mailbox tampering was potentially a federal offense. And the pattern of behavior over months showed it wasn't a one-time thing. It was sustained, targeted harassment. I also filed a separate report for the mail tampering and forwarded the footage to the postal inspector's office. If you didn't know, messing with someone's mail is a federal crime under Title 18 of the U.S. Code. The postal inspectors do not play around. About a week and a half later, the detective called me at work. I was in the middle of inspecting water damage at a commercial property, and I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number. Glad I did. She said they had reviewed everything. The DA had signed off, and they were ready to make an arrest. She asked if there was anything else I wanted to add to the file before they moved. I told her no. I'd given her everything. The file was complete. She asked if I wanted to be notified before the arrest happened. I said I'd prefer not to be home when it went down. Didn't want to be standing in my yard watching it happen. Felt like that would make things worse somehow. She understood. They picked him up on a Thursday afternoon around 3 p.m. I was at a site visit about 40 minutes away. But Don was home. Don's always home, bless that man. And he texted me a play-by-play in real time. 2 officers just pulled up. Then a minute later, they're at his door. Then, he's coming out. He looks confused. Then, they just put him in the back of the car. He didn't look your way once. He's just staring straight ahead. I sat in my car in a parking lot reading those texts, and I honestly didn't feel triumphant or victorious or whatever word you'd expect. I just felt tired and relieved. Mostly relieved. Good. He was charged with criminal mischief, petty larceny, multiple counts, criminal trespass, and harassment. The mailbox situation was referred to the federal postal inspector separately, and as of my last check, that investigation is still pending. The detective told me the DA's office was considering additional charges based on the sustained pattern, but I don't have details on that yet. What I do know is that he was released on bond with conditions that include no contact with me, and he can't be on my property, which is funny because I'd never invited him onto my property in the first place. Yo, time out. Can we take a moment to appreciate how Jake handled this from start to finish? Because most people in this situation would have lost it. They would have confronted the guy, gotten in a shouting match, maybe done something stupid that gets them in trouble. Jake didn't do any of that. He did exactly what he does Monday through Friday. He collected evidence, built a file, organized it like a professional, and handed it to the people whose job it is to act on it. The detective called his paperwork thorough. That's the equivalent of a chef complimenting your cooking. The night shift brought a plastic bag of dog poop to a fight with an insurance claims adjuster. Read that sentence again. Final update. It's been a couple weeks since the arrest and things have been quiet, obviously. The night shift is still living next door as far as I know, but I haven't seen him once. His truck is in the driveway most days, but he doesn't come outside when I'm around. The blinds on the side of his house that faces mine are always closed now. It's like living next to a ghost, which honestly is a massive upgrade from living next to a 3 a.m. lawn, vandalizing, package-stealing, car-scratching psycho. My car is getting repaired finally. I'm using the documentation I built to file a civil claim for the damages, and my attorney, a guy I know from processing claims, we've worked opposite sides of a few cases, says the criminal charges make the civil case pretty straightforward. Between the footage, the police report, and the charge sheet, there's not a ton of wiggle room for the night shift to argue he didn't do it. Don and Liz have become actual friends. I go over there for dinner sometimes. Don grills on his back patio, and we sit out there and talk about whatever. He told me that the night shift had actually done some weird stuff before I moved in too. Nothing as bad as what he did to me, but Don had caught him on camera looking into other neighbors' cars and walking through people's yards at night. He just never connected it to anything criminal until my situation made it obvious. Rita, my neighbor on the other side, came over after the arrest and told me she was glad someone finally did something. Apparently, she'd found her flower pots moved around a few times, and once found one of her garden tools in a different spot than she left it. She'd chalked it up to her own memory, but now she's not so sure. I did finally install that doorbell camera, and a full 4-camera security system around the house. 2 in front, 2 in back. Motion activated, night vision, cloud storage. I also got the locking mailbox installed and added a smart lock to my front door. Total cost for the security upgrades was about $1,200, but honestly, it's the best money I've ever spent. Not because I think he'll try something again, the no contact order handles that, but because I should have had this stuff from day one. Lesson learned, The one thing I keep thinking about is why. I never did anything to this man. I moved in, I waved, I went about my life, and he decided to make me his target. The detective said it might have been something as simple as him not wanting a new neighbor. The previous owner was an elderly woman who lived alone and kept to herself. Maybe he liked having that quiet buffer, and my presence disrupted it. Maybe it's something else entirely. I'll probably never know. My buddy Cole saw the highlight reel and said it should be on Netflix. I told him it's a 20-minute video of a middle-aged man in pajamas sneaking across a lawn with a bag of dog waste. He said that's exactly why it should be on Netflix. There's a part of me that wonders what the other neighbors on the street think now. I've gotten a few waves and head nods since the arrest, but nobody's brought it up directly. Small town, well, suburban, politeness, I guess. Everyone knows, but nobody says it. As for what's next, I'm waiting on the civil case to move forward and keeping an eye on the federal mail investigation. My attorney says the civil suit should be pretty clean given the evidence. I'm asking for the full $11,400 in documented damages plus legal fees. Whether I'll get all of it, who knows? But the documentation is airtight, and I've got the footage to back every dollar. I guess the moral of the story, if there is one, is that some problems solve themselves if you're patient enough to let the evidence pile up. I could have confronted him at any point. I could have gotten angry, made a scene, escalated it. But I didn't. I let the cameras do the talking and the paperwork do the fighting. And honestly, the highlight reel is pretty solid. Quick update for anyone still following along. The DA's office added an additional charge of criminal damage to property based on the grass-killing footage. My attorney also sent a formal demand letter to the night shift's legal representation for the full $11,400. We're waiting on a response. Dawn told me the guy's brother came by last weekend to mow the lawn and take out the trash, so I think the night shift is laying very low right now. Can't say I blame him, though I also can't say I feel bad about it. One thing I didn't mention before, I still have no idea where he was getting the dog waste. He doesn't have a dog. None of the immediate neighbors have dogs. That remains the one unsolved mystery of this whole thing, and honestly, I'm not sure I want the answer. Anyway, if you're in a situation like mine, document everything. Get cameras. Get your neighbors involved. And if your job happens to involve building evidence files for a living, well, sometimes the universe just hands you the right tools for the job. So here's my question for you guys. Would you have waited as long as I did? Or would you have confronted the neighbor the second you suspected something? I've gotten both takes from friends, and I'm genuinely curious where people land on it. Let me know. All right, so here's my take on this. Jake played it absolutely perfectly. He treated his unhinged neighbor the same way he treats a Monday morning claims file. Facts, timestamps, organized paperwork, zero emotion. And that's exactly why the night shift is sitting at home with closed blinds and criminal charges instead of getting away with it. The guy brought a bag of dog poop to a fight with a professional evidence collector. Read that back and tell me that's not the funniest mismatch since a hamster tried to fight a German Shepherd. Drop your answer to Jake's question in the comments. Wait it out or confront early. I want to know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, smash that button because we've got stories like this every single day. After 10 years of ignoring me, they had the nerve to show up at my mansion. I opened the door, spoke calmly, and watched the color drain from their faces. Throwaway because my family watches my main. Long post ahead, please be kind. No wild language, no brands, just the facts and the mess that followed. If you've ever been treated like the family's cautionary tale and then watched those same folks circle back the second you succeed, you'll understand why last Sunday morning changed everything. I was in my garage working on a custom motorcycle build when my Ring doorbell went off. Sunday morning, 9 a.m., and there's a whole parade of people on my front porch. At first, I thought maybe it was some religious group or something, but when I checked the app, my blood went cold. Standing there like they owned the place were 7 members of my family who hadn't said more than 2 words to me in 10 years. My grandmother Patricia, my Aunt Monica and Uncle Steve, my cousins Tyler and Brandon, and my older brother Jake, with some blonde I'd never seen before. I'm Derek, 35, and seeing these people on my property felt like finding rats in your kitchen. For context, my house isn't some suburban cookie cutter. It's a 4,500 square foot custom build on 5 acres outside Austin, complete with a 4-car garage, workshop, and enough land that I can't see my neighbors. The kind of place that cost me 7 figures, but was worth every penny. My first instinct was to ignore them. These were the same people who'd cut me out of family gatherings for a decade because I chose to start my own construction company instead of following their safe corporate career path. But something about their body language, the way they were all huddled together looking nervous, made me curious. The security cameras had caught them pulling up in two vehicles, Jake's beat-up Honda Civic that had seen better days, and what looked like a rental car that Uncle Steve was probably going to expense somehow. They'd been standing there for a good 5 minutes before ringing the bell, clearly working up the nerve. I watched them through the app as they whispered among themselves, Grandmother Patricia adjusting her handbag multiple times like she was preparing for battle. To understand why this visit was so mind-blowing, you need to know how we got here. Growing up in a working-class family in Houston, I was always the odd one out. My old man, Robert, was a shift supervisor at a chemical plant. My mom, Linda, worked part-time at a dental office. They were good people, but they had this narrow view of success. College, corporate job, suburbs, retire with a pension. My brother Jake was their golden boy. Straight A's, football team captain, full scholarship to University of Texas for business. I, on the other hand, was the kid who took apart lawnmowers in the garage and built tree houses that looked like something from a magazine. While Jake was cramming for exams, I was learning welding from YouTube and building custom furniture in shop class. The difference in how we were treated was night and day. When Jake brought home a report card, it was celebration time. Dinner at his favorite restaurant, calls to relatives to brag about his achievements. When I brought home something I'd built in woodshop, a jewelry box for Mom's birthday that took me 3 weeks to perfect, the response was always the same. That's nice, honey. Did you finish your algebra homework? Every Sunday, we'd go to Grandmother Patricia's house for dinner. She ruled that family with an iron fist, and her favorite topic was comparing all the grandkids to each other. Jake was always the success story. Tyler and Brandon, my cousins, were finding their path, which meant screwing around in community college. And me? I was the creative one. Code for future disappointment. The hierarchy was established early and never changed. Jake got the good seat at dinner, next to Grandmother Patricia, where he could regale everyone with stories about his academic achievements. I usually ended up squeezed between younger cousins at the kids' end of the table, even when I was 16 and 17 years old. The whole extended family had this obsession with appearances. Aunt Monica married Uncle Steve, who worked in middle management at an insurance company, and they acted like he was some kind of business mogul. They lived in a decent house in the suburbs and drove lease cars they couldn't really afford, but they played the part of success. Their social media posts were carefully curated to show expensive dinners, vacation photos, and humble brags about promotions and raises. The cracks started showing when I was 17. Jake was finishing up his sophomore year at UT, making good grades, dating someone our parents loved. Meanwhile, I was getting into trouble at school. Not for anything bad, but for skipping classes to work construction jobs under the table. I was making more money as a high school student working weekends than most adults in our family made in a month. The money I was earning wasn't just pocket change either. I was pulling in $800 to $1,000 per weekend doing framing work, concrete pours, and finish carpentry. By senior year, I had saved up $15,000, more than my parents had in their emergency fund. But instead of being proud, they were embarrassed. When neighbors asked about my weekend jobs, Mom would quickly change the subject or make excuses about me helping out a family friend. When I told my parents I wasn't going to college, it was like I'd announced I was joining a gang. The fights were epic. Dad threatening to kick me out, Mom crying, calling me selfish and ungrateful. But the family reaction was even worse. At Jake's graduation party, Grandmother Patricia cornered me by the barbecue pit. Derek, this construction phase needs to stop. You're embarrassing the family. Jake has a real future. You're just playing with tools. That conversation lasted 20 minutes, with her listing all the ways I was disappointing the family. She brought up my cousin Michael, who'd gone to community college and now worked at a bank. She mentioned family friends whose kids were pursuing respectable careers in teaching and nursing. She even compared me to the neighbor's son who'd enlisted in the military. At least that was honorable service instead of manual labor. That's when I knew I was done trying to fit into their narrow box. I moved out the next week, got a job with Torres Construction, and started learning the business from the ground up. While Jake was partying his way through his final 2 years of college, I was mastering every aspect of the construction trade. My first apartment was a studio above a garage that I rented from one of the guys on my crew. It wasn't much, 400 square feet with a hot plate and a mini fridge, but it was mine. I furnished it with pieces I built myself and felt more at home there than I ever had in my childhood bedroom. The family's attitude became clear pretty quick. At family gatherings, they'd ask Jake about his internships and career prospects with genuine interest. When they talked to me, it was all polite questions about my handiwork and suggestions that I think about going back to school for something more stable. The condescension was subtle but constant. Uncle Steve would pat me on the shoulder and say things like, "Well, somebody's got to do the physical work, right?" Aunt Monica would ask if I was still doing the construction thing, like it was a hobby I'd eventually outgrow. Cousins Tyler and Brandon, who were barely passing their community college classes, would make jokes about me being the family's muscle for hire. The breaking point came when I was 23. My brother Jake had landed a mid-level accounting job, making $45,000 a year, which the family treated like he'd won the lottery. Meanwhile, I'd just started Rodriguez Construction, with two guys from my crew, armed with a $25,000 loan against my truck and every penny of my savings. Starting my own company wasn't a whim. I'd spent 5 years at Torres Construction, learning everything about bidding, project management, permits, and dealing with suppliers. My boss was grooming me to take over, but I was too impatient to build something of my own. Those first months were terrifying. Sleeping on invoices, hoping clients would pay on time, doing everything from accounting to clean up myself. But we were getting results. Our first major project was renovating a 1920s bungalow, and the before and after photos started circulating around town. At Christmas dinner, I made the fatal mistake of trying to share my success. I'd just landed a $380,000 custom home contract, my biggest job yet. When I mentioned it, hoping for some family support, the response was brutal. "That's nice, Derek," Aunt Monica said, barely looking up from her phone. "But what happens when the construction market crashes?" "Jake has job security." Uncle Steve nodded along. "Construction is boom and bust, kid. You should think about getting your real estate license or something more reliable." What followed was a masterclass in backhanded compliments and concern trolling. They questioned my business model, wondered about my insurance coverage, and suggested I was being reckless. Meanwhile, Jake sat there smiling while everyone praised his smart career choice. But grandmother Patricia delivered the killing blow. "Derek, playing contractor is fine for now, but when are you going to settle down and get serious? Jake's already talking about buying a house with Sarah. You're still living in that apartment, working with your hands like a laborer." The word laborer was said with the same tone you'd use for criminal. In that moment, I realized these people would never respect what I did, no matter how successful I became. The irony was thick. Jake's secure job paid less than I was making working for someone else, and my new company was on track to gross $400,000 in its first year. I left early that night and didn't look back. The final straw came at Jake's engagement party. By then, my business was pulling in $600,000 annually, and I was personally netting about $180,000. I offered to help with costs. The response? "Thanks, but we've got it covered. Maybe just bring a nice gift." At the party, I was seated with family friends I'd never met while Jake's college buddies sat at the main family table. When Jake gave his speech thanking everyone who'd supported him, he mentioned his boss, professors, even friends from school. 8 minutes of gratitude for everyone who'd helped shape his life, and I wasn't worth a single sentence. That's when I stopped trying. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, I'd make it easy for them. The next 5 years were the most focused of my life. Rodriguez Construction went from 3 people with a truck to 20 full-time employees with equipment worth more than most people's houses. I specialized in high-end custom builds and commercial projects, the kind where clients don't ask about price because they know quality costs money. By 28, I was pulling in mid-six figures annually, but I kept it quiet. Drove the same F-250 work truck, lived in a decent apartment, and poured everything back into the business. The family had no idea what I was doing. When I ran into extended family around town, they'd ask how the construction thing was going, with that same patronizing tone. Meanwhile, Jake's suburban dream was cracking. Word travels in small circles. His mortgage was high, plus car payments, credit card debt, and a wife with expensive tastes and no income. The real estate boom hit Austin hard around 2018, and everything changed for me. Suddenly, every successful business owner wanted custom houses, and they all wanted the guy who built quality without cutting corners. I landed 3 contracts in 6 months worth over $2 million total. These weren't ordinary projects. A 6,000 square foot modern farmhouse for a tech founder, a historic downtown building conversion, a custom workshop for a rare car collector. Each project pushed my skills and built relationships with clients who became repeat customers and referral sources. That's when I bought 5 acres of hill country and started planning my own place. Not to show off, but because I wanted to build something that would last. The design process took months. Traditional exterior with every modern convenience, built to last generations. Custom millwork, imported tile, commercial-grade everything. The garage was set up like a professional shop. The office overlooked my own engineered lake. By 2020, I was worth millions on paper. Rodriguez Construction was booked solid for 18 months out. I had employees making more money than most college graduates. But to my family, I was still just Derek, who worked construction. The isolation didn't bother me. I'd built solid friendships with other business owners, craftsmen, and clients. Real relationships based on mutual respect, not family obligation. When my crew needed help, we had each other's backs. When my electrician's house flooded, we spent a weekend rebuilding his basement for free. I dated but never got serious, especially after watching Jake's marriage implode when Sarah left him for a lawyer during his firm's downsizing. I had better things to do than play those games. The best revenge, they say, is living well. While my family was trapped in their suburban bubble, defining success by appearances and social status, I was building something real. Every morning I wake up on my own land, in a house I designed and built, surrounded by work that will outlast me. And you know what? It took them 3 years to even notice I was gone. When COVID hit, construction was considered essential. So while everyone else was locked down, I was busier than ever. People stuck at home wanted renovations, additions, custom offices. I added a second crew and started working on commercial projects for businesses, adapting to the new reality. The pandemic created opportunities I'd never imagined. Restaurants needed outdoor seating areas built quickly. Office buildings required modifications for spacing. Families who were working from home wanted dedicated office spaces, home gyms, and outdoor entertainment areas. My company pivoted faster than most because we'd always been adaptable. While big construction firms were tied up in bureaucracy and change orders, we could bid on a project Monday and start work Wednesday. Clients were willing to pay premium prices for that kind of responsiveness. By 2021, I was doing several million in annual revenue and taking home a strong personal income. I bought a new truck, some investment properties, and started looking at expanding into Dallas and San Antonio. The investment properties were a calculated move. I bought distressed places in good neighborhoods, renovated them with my own crews during slow periods, and either sold them or kept them as rentals. It was a natural extension of my construction expertise, and it provided diversified income streams that didn't depend solely on new construction projects. That's when Cousin Tyler's girlfriend saw my truck at a gas station and recognized me. She followed me on a social platform, which I barely used, but had a few photos of my work. Next thing I know, family members are creeping on my posts, seeing pictures of my house, my equipment, the high-end projects I was posting. My account was mostly a business tool. Before and after photos of projects, shots of the crew at work, occasionally a picture of a completed space. But to someone who knew me, it painted a clear picture of success. The projects were obviously high-end, the equipment was top of the line, and the quality of work was undeniable. Suddenly, after years of silence, I started getting random texts. "Hey Derek, hope you're doing well. Saw your post about that mansion you built. Looks incredible. We should catch up soon." The messages were transparently fake. Tyler, who hadn't spoken to me in 6 years, suddenly wanted to grab coffee and catch up. Brandon sent me a friend request after ignoring my existence since high school. Even Aunt Monica started liking my business posts, which was funny since she'd spent years telling people I was wasting my life. I ignored them all. If they wanted to reconnect because they discovered I had money, that told me everything I needed to know about their intentions. But I had no idea they were planning an ambush. I walked to the front door, steel-toed boots echoing on the entryway. When I opened it, the look on their faces was priceless. They were expecting the family failure they'd been talking about for years. Instead, they got a 6'2" guy in shape, wearing a good flannel and jeans that fit. "Derek," Grandmother Patricia spoke first, her voice trying to sound warm but coming off stiff. "What a beautiful home you have." "Yeah, well, hard work pays off," I replied, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. The silence stretched on like a bad first date. Finally, Aunt Monica stepped forward with this plastic smile. "We were in town for the Johnson family reunion. You remember the Johnsons? We thought we'd stop by since we heard you lived out this way." The casual mention almost made me laugh. These people hadn't cared where I lived for 10 years, and now they're acting like we were close. Plus, the Johnsons lived 2 hours away, so this wasn't exactly a casual stop by. "How thoughtful," I said, my voice flat. "You want to come in? Or are we having this conversation on the porch?" They filed past me into the foyer, and I watched their eyes go wide. Vaulted ceilings, custom ironwork, original art on the walls. The works. The entryway alone probably cost more than most people's annual salary. Custom wrought iron chandelier, imported stone flooring with radiant heating, Solid walnut staircase with hand-forged railings. Cousin Tyler couldn't help himself. Man, Derek, this place is incredible. What did this run you? More than you make in 3 years, I replied without missing a beat. I gave them the full tour because I wanted to see their reactions. The living room with 20-foot ceilings and custom stone fireplace. The kitchen with professional-grade appliances and a center island bigger than most people's bedrooms. The office lined with awards and photos from high-end projects. Tyler kept making low whistles. Brandon was taking pictures for his girlfriend, which meant documenting everything to share later. Jake's new wife was calculating property values in her head, but grandmother Patricia's reaction told me the most. She was reevaluating everything she thought she knew about me. The grandson she'd written off as a failure was clearly more successful than anyone else in the family. And the real reason reveals itself. We ended up in the living room with coffee and pastries. Small talk about weather, their drive out, safe topics that avoided the elephant in the room. I answered their questions about the house and business with just enough detail to make them understand the scale of what I'd built. The living room was designed for entertaining, with a seating area that could accommodate 15 people comfortably. The fireplace was faced with stone I'd quarried myself from the property, and the mantel was a single piece of mesquite that I'd had milled and finished by hand. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided views of the lake and landscaped grounds. That's when Aunt Monica cleared her throat, the universal signal that we were getting to the real reason for their visit. "Derek, we've been thinking about family lately," she started, using that careful voice that made my skin crawl. "Jake's going through some financial difficulties with the divorce settlement and legal fees." There it was, the setup. I kept my expression neutral and waited for the pitch. "Legal fees?" I asked, playing dumb. Jake looked uncomfortable, but Monica pressed on. "The custody battle with Sarah has been expensive. She hired one of those high-end divorce attorneys, and you know how messy these things can get." I knew exactly how messy they could get, because I'd been hearing about Jake's divorce through mutual acquaintances for months. Sarah wasn't just taking half of everything. She was going for alimony, claiming she'd sacrificed her career to support his advancement. The fact that she'd never had a career to sacrifice was apparently irrelevant to her attorney. Uncle Steve jumped in. "Actually, Derek, I've been looking at some investment opportunities in the construction sector. With your expertise and connections, we could probably put together something lucrative for the whole family." I had to give them credit for creativity. Instead of straight up asking for money, they were positioning it as business opportunities and family support. But I could read between the lines. Jake needed cash, and they'd decided his successful brother should provide it. The investment opportunity angle was particularly insulting. These people who'd never shown interest in my business when it was struggling were now ready to become partners now that it was successful. They wanted to skip the years of long days, financial risk, and building relationships with suppliers and clients. Grandmother Patricia delivered what she thought was the closing argument. "We've missed having you at family gatherings, Derek. It's time we put the past behind us and started acting like a real family again. Family takes care of family after all." The audacity was impressive. After 10 years of treating me like an embarrassment, they were now ready to welcome me back to the family, as long as I brought my checkbook. I leaned back in my leather chair and studied their faces. These people had written me off when I was struggling to build something from nothing. Now that I'd succeeded beyond their expectations, suddenly they wanted to be family again. Truth time. "That's interesting," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Remind me, when was the last family gathering I was invited to?" The silence was loud. They all looked at each other, hoping someone else would answer. "Well," Monica said finally, "you know how it is with busy schedules and everything?" "No," I interrupted. "I don't know how it is. Why don't you tell me?" More uncomfortable silence. They'd come here expecting the old Derek, the one who desperately wanted their approval and would do anything to belong. They were about to discover that version of me lived in the past. Jake finally found his voice. "Derek, I know we haven't been as close as we should have been." "Close?" I interrupted. "I haven't received a phone call, text message, birthday card, or holiday gift from anyone in this room in over 8 years. You got married twice and didn't even tell me. Grandmother here told people that I was a construction worker who'd never amount to anything. And now you want to talk about being close?" Their faces went pale. The comfortable fiction they'd been living with, that our estrangement was somehow mutual, was being shattered by facts they couldn't deny. Tyler tried to play peacemaker. "Hey man, maybe we all could have done better at staying in touch." "Staying in touch?" I stood up, my full height making them all look up at me. "Let me tell you about staying in touch. When I started my company, I called Dad to tell him about my first big contract. You know what he said? 'That's nice, son. Jake just got promoted to senior accountant. When I bought this land and started building, I sent Mom pictures because I was proud of what I'd accomplished. She showed them to people and told them I was still playing with tools. The room was dead silent. Even the clock in the corner seemed to have stopped ticking. When Jake got engaged the first time, I continued, I offered to help pay for the wedding. Monica here told me they had it covered. But thanks anyway. At the reception, I was seated with people I'd never met while Jake's friends got the family table. When he gave his speech thanking everyone who'd helped him succeed, he mentioned his professors, his boss, even his buddies, but not his brother who offered to help. Jake looked down at his hands. Derek, I'm not done, I said, my voice getting firmer. When grandmother Patricia had her heart surgery 5 years ago, I drove to the hospital with flowers and offers to help with medical bills. The nurse told me visiting was for immediate family only. When I said I was her grandson, Monica here told the staff that I was just distant family, and it would be better if I waited. That incident still burned. I'd driven hours after getting word about grandmother's surgery, bringing flowers and a card with a check to help with expenses. Instead of being welcomed, I was turned away like a stranger. The nurse was confused because I clearly knew family details, but Monica insisted I should wait until after the immediate family had visited. I ended up spending 4 hours in the hospital cafeteria, waiting for permission to see my own grandmother. When I finally got 5 minutes with her, she was groggy and barely acknowledged my presence. I left the check with Monica, who never mentioned whether grandmother even knew about it. Grandmother Patricia's face was white as a sheet. The reality of how they'd treated me was being laid out in detail, and there was no way to spin it. So no, I said, sitting back down. We haven't been not as close as we should have been. You cut me out of this family completely. And now that you found out I'm more successful than all of you combined, suddenly you want to be family again. That's not family. That's a transaction. The gold digger shows her true colors. That's when Jake's wife, who'd been quiet, decided to speak up. Look, Derek, she said, standing up with this confident tilt to her chin. I don't know what happened between you all in the past, and honestly, I don't care. What I care about is that Jake has been struggling financially since his divorce, and you clearly have more money than you know what to do with. Family helps family. Period. The room went quiet. Even the other family members looked uncomfortable with her directness. But she kept going. I mean, look at this place. She gestured around the room. You're obviously loaded. Jake is your brother, and he needs help. It's not like you earned all this yourself. You got lucky with some construction contracts during the boom. The least you could do is help out the family that raised you. I stared at her for a long moment, processing the sheer audacity of what she'd just said. Then I started laughing. Not polite chuckling, deep, genuine laughter that made everyone in the room shift. What's so funny? She demanded, her face flushing. You, I said, wiping my eyes. You're exactly what I expected. Jake always had a type, pretty, entitled, and completely unaware of how the real world works. Derek, Grandmother Patricia snapped. I ignored her and focused on the blonde. What's your name again? Brittany, she said, lifting her chin. Brittany, tell me, what do you do for work? I'm a social media influencer, she replied. Of course she was. How many followers? 12,000 on one platform, 8,000 on another. I nodded seriously. And how much income does that generate monthly? Her confidence wavered slightly. Well, it's building up. So nothing. You make nothing. I turned to Jake. Brother, you divorced a gold digger and married another. That's either really bad luck or poor judgment. Jake's face went red. Don't talk to my wife that way. Your wife just told me I should give you my money because family helps family, while admitting she doesn't know or care about our history. She called my success luck and claimed I didn't earn it myself. But I'm the bad guy for pointing out that she's a social media influencer with no income telling me how to spend my money? Brittany crossed her arms. I'm just saying, if I had millions and my family needed help, you'd what? I interrupted. You'd give it away to people who treated you like garbage for 10 years? Tell me, Brittany, how much money have you given to Jake since you married him? That's different. How is it different? You married him knowing he had financial problems from his divorce. What have you contributed to solving those problems besides telling other people they should pay? The silence was heavy. She had no answer because the answer was nothing. But Brittany wasn't done. You know what your problem is, Derek? You're selfish. You have all this money and you're hoarding it instead of helping your family. Jake told me you used to be close when you were kids. Jake told you we used to be close? I looked at my brother. Is that the story you've been telling people? That we grew up close and drifted apart? Jake couldn't meet my eyes. Derek, we were close when we were kids. We were never close, Jake. You were the golden boy who did everything right. And I was the disappointment who chose the wrong path. That was the dynamic from day one, and you never did anything to change it. Even when we were kids, you went along with everyone else treating me like I was somehow less than you. The numbers don't lie. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Brittany, you said I got lucky with construction contracts. Let me show you what luck looks like. I opened my banking app and turned the screen toward them. This is my business account. Current balance, in the millions. That's just the checking account. Doesn't include investments, retirement accounts, or property values. Their eyes went wide, staring at the number on the screen. This house cost me a lot to build. I paid cash. The workshop has about hundreds of thousands worth of equipment. The trucks outside, the F-350 dually cost a fortune. The vintage car I'm restoring is worth 6 figures when finished. And that's just the toys. I switched to another app. My investment portfolio is strong. I own several rental properties with solid equity. Last year, my company generated multi-million-dollar revenue, and I personally netted a high income after taxes. The quiet was intense. They'd known I was successful, but seeing the actual scale overwhelmed them. So when you say I got lucky, Brittany, what you mean is that I worked long weeks for 15 years, built a reputation for quality that commands premium prices, and made careful financial decisions. But sure, let's call it luck. The final truth bomb. Jake was staring at his hands. Derek, I had no idea. No idea what? That your brother was successful? That I'd built something significant while you were playing office politics and getting taken to the cleaners? I tried to tell you about my success for years. You just weren't listening. I walked to the window again, looking out at my property. You know what the saddest part is? I would have shared all of this with family who actually cared about me. When I was building this place, I had visions of hosting family cookouts, having nieces and nephews come stay for summers, being the successful uncle who helped with school funds. Turning back to face them, I continued. But that required having a family that saw me as more than a disappointment. Instead, I built relationships with people who respected what I was building. My foreman? I helped him buy his own house. My office manager? I'm paying for her daughter's education. My concrete crew leader? I co-signed his business loan when the bank wouldn't approve him. Grandmother Patricia was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Derek, we made mistakes. Mistakes? I laughed once, short. Grandmother, you told people you were embarrassed to have a grandson who worked with his hands like a common laborer. Monica told her neighbors that I was the family failure who'd never amount to anything. Jake didn't even invite me to his first wedding. I pulled out my phone again. You want to know about mistakes? Let me show you what you really lost. I scrolled through my photos and found the ones I was looking for. This is the children's hospital wing I donated to build last year. It's named after our great-grandfather, the one who worked construction his whole life to feed his family. Their faces went pale as they realized the implications. This is the scholarship fund I established at the community college, every year for kids who want to learn trades instead of going into debt at 4-year schools. And this, I showed them another photo, is the shelter I helped build and furnish. Donated all the labor and materials. The hospital wing was something I'd been particularly proud of. The children's wing had been operating in a converted basement for years, with poor lighting and outdated equipment. My donation helped fund a complete renovation with child-friendly design, natural lighting, and space for families to stay during treatment. The scholarship fund was personal too. Every year, I selected students who wanted to learn trades but couldn't afford the tools and materials. The scholarship covered everything: tuition, books, tools, work boots, safety equipment. Several of my recipients now worked for my company full-time. Aunt Monica was crying now. Derek, we didn't know. You didn't know because you never asked. You were too busy looking down on me to notice what I was actually accomplishing. I put my phone away and looked at each of them in turn. But here's the thing. I didn't do those things for recognition or to prove anything to you. I did them because it was the right thing to do. The moment of truth. Brandon, who'd been quiet, finally spoke up. Derek, is there any way we can make this right? I know we messed up, but family should mean something. I studied his face for a long moment. Out of all of them, he seemed to genuinely understand the magnitude of what they'd done. Brandon, family does mean something. It means being there for each other through good times and bad. It means celebrating each other's successes without jealousy. It means having each other's backs when the world tries to tear you down. I paused, letting that sink in. Tell me, when did any of you ever do that for me? He couldn't answer because the answer was never. You want to know what family means to me now? Last month, when the floods hit East Texas, I took 6 of my people and 4 trucks to help with cleanup and repairs. We worked for free for 2 weeks helping folks rebuild their homes. Those people, they're my family now. We've got each other's backs because we chose to, not because we share DNA. The flood relief work had been exhausting but rewarding. We'd worked long days clearing debris, tarping roofs, and helping families salvage what they could from waterlogged homes. My crew volunteered their time, and I covered all the expenses: fuel, equipment, meals, hotel rooms. We helped over 50 families get back on their feet. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. That's what family looks like. Now get out of my house. As they filed past me toward the door, each one looking defeated and ashamed, Jake stopped and turned back. Derek, I know I don't deserve it, but if you ever change your mind about giving us another chance. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. The golden boy who'd had everything handed to him and squandered it through poor decisions and worse taste in partners. The man who'd stood by while his family treated me like nothing for 10 years. Jake, you want another chance? Here's what that looks like. You figure out your situation without asking anyone for help. You prove you can stand on your own feet. And most importantly, you learn how to treat people with respect instead of seeing them as either useful or disposable. He nodded slowly, eyes wet. And if I do all that, then maybe we can have a conversation about being brothers, but not until then. As they drove away, I stood in my doorway, watching their taillights disappear down my private road. For the first time in 10 years, I felt completely free of the weight of their expectations and judgments. My phone buzzed with a text from my foreman. Boss, poker game tonight. You in? I smiled and typed back, absolutely. Family dinner, right? You know it, boss. I locked the door and walked back to my garage where the Chevelle was waiting. Some things are worth restoring, and some things are better left in the past. After 10 years, I'd finally learned the difference.